love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to, where are we? Where am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Here I am. How you going, everybody? Welcome to another SDAQ&A program. Today we are doing the old rewatch of the seminal series Season 2, where I interviewed a bunch of people about Glacier View, Des Ford, what led up to it, what happened, what are the ramifications that still reverberate around the Seventh-day Adventist Church to this day. So, yeah, this was season 2, episode number 22. I'll get the details up on the wall in a moment. And the interview was with, better just check I pronounce it all correctly, Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen. And he, I think, completed it was the 5th president of Andrews University. And he was born in 1941, and he was the president there at Andrews University at Berrien Springs in Michigan from 1994 to 2016. And whenever I mention his name, people often refer to him as an elder statesman. So what was interesting about this season, where we did 86 interviews, is that a lot of the interviews, I was doing 4 to 6 a week. This is 5 years ago during lockdown. And Gillian Ford, some other people, Lance Cameron Eggy from the Philippines, were getting in touch with a lot of the scholars and academics that knew a lot about the Des Ford Glacier View episode, or were actually there. And I was interviewing, as I said, 4 to 6 different people a week in lockdown. And so a lot of these interviews I haven't rewatched since then, and I can't remember a lot of the content. But I do remember that it was a very impactful series, season 2. Lots and lots of information was shed on Glacier View, lots of truths revealed, falsehoods corrected, and lies put to bed. And so my goal now is to get season 2 up here on YouTube, and also to our very own season 2 channel on YouTube, where people will be able to go in the future, and even now, and just have the season 2 content to watch. So I encourage you guys to find that as well. I'll put the link in the description, and I'll put it across I'll bring it up onto the screen as well, the address for that. So the reason that I began putting this content up onto YouTube is because Facebook is deleting all the live videos in groups and pages and whatnot. And already this one has disappeared. And when I went looking for it this morning, I couldn't find it. But luckily I'd saved it somewhere obscure on my computer, or on another hard drive linked to the computer. I just simply put it in the wrong place. So I'm wanting to put them all up on YouTube for everybody to watch and enjoy and study. And because they're really hard to find on Facebook, and now they're gone. They're not on Facebook. So so we're creating history by putting season 2 up onto YouTube and into one place. Those wanting to watch for fun, even now, from that channel, if you just go to YouTube /at SDAQEASON 2, SDA season 2, the number 2. And you can find us and watch from over there. Let me know in the comments if you are watching from there now. Okay, without further ado, we will get into this. But welcome, everybody. Good to see you all watching, and great to have you here. So I hope you can sit back and enjoy this conversation I had with Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen. And I hope he gets to watch this as well at some point again. I'll certainly be sending him the link. I hope Gillian Ford watches. She might like to comment and maybe even come on after we've finished. Gillian, come and share some of your thoughts and views as well. But I do remember him as being a real gentleman, gentle person, a true statesman, an elder statesman. And I often wonder what he's doing now. I'm not sure if he was involved with this book. Yes, he was involved with the book that I keep bringing up, which I keep showing. Reclaiming the Prophet. He is one of the authors. So, yeah. So I think he would firmly fit in that category that that would like to see the Adventist Church move forward and be a bit more inclusive of a variety of, people. If I told him that Ted Wilson's Adventism was the real Adventism, he would say that's not my Adventism. And good on him. And good on all of you that are saying that's not your Adventism. And I think books like this, the recording of Des Ford at the Forum meeting, October 27, 1979, which I have in its entirety here on the program, look it up. And an essay that John Rosier wrote called What Adventism Could Have Been, something like that. Those three things, and I'm going to do a show soon on those three: the Reclaiming book, the tape that took the world by storm, and John Rosier's very important essay, which I don't think has been given much airplay at all. So that's going to come soon as well. Anyway, I'm prattling a little bit. And Jane has just said, yeah, I should interview him about that book. Great idea. I will reach out. I'll have my people reach out to his people and see if we can, because I did enjoy conversing with him, and I think he would be open. These guys, as I've said many times, while I cajole and criticize, I really admire that they've taken a stand, finally, maybe a bit late. And, hopefully it gets out there. John asks, is he the son of M.L. Andreasen? I don't think they are related. I do ask him that question. I do remember that. Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty sure they're no relation, the M.L. Andreasen, to this guy, but we'll find out. I did ask him that. Okay, well, let's get started. Sit back, and I've got my SDAQ&A mug, still available in Australia if you'd like to buy one. $20 plus postage, but in the States it's so expensive to get there. I'm trying to find an outlet over there that can print them up and send them out to those in the States who might like a mug. Okay, let's go. But welcome. Good to see you all. Niels-Erik Andreasen, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
And can I call you Niels-Erik, or would you prefer the doctor added the whole time?
Well, that's what my mother calls me, so you may too.
Thank you very much. I love to Google people when I'm about to do a show, and your name came up as someone that's been playing Danish football for the last few years, and I thought that may not be the one. So yeah, unless you do secretly play professional football for the Danish side, unbeknownst to us all.
This is what we played after school when I was a boy, and so I do know the game.
Yeah, it's a great game. So look, it's really great to have you here, and as those that are watching will know, you've held some very interesting positions within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You were president for a time there at Andrews University, And before we kind of have a bit of a look into Glacier View and some of your thoughts on what led up to it, the actual event, some of the ramifications post Glacier View, just tell us a little bit about your time at Andrews, and also go back to some of your childhood time too. Where were you born? Some of your early memories, and just build up to your career and what you were doing at Andrews, and then we'll dip back into Glacier View.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet somebody from Avondale. We spent 2 years. We were sort of conscripted to go there by Adventist education. There was an affiliation between Avondale and Pacific Union College, where I had just begun teaching, and that affiliation required a presence from each institution on the campus of the other. And so I led, we were the first from PUC to Avondale, and a partner from Avondale went to PUC, stayed in our house, and taught my classes for these 2 years.
A lecture exchange.
It was an exchange, and it went for some years, and that's what put me in contact with Svart, because he was teaching there. In fact, he was the chair of the department in which I worked for these 2 years at Avondale. And so that belonged to the beginning of my life, work, teaching, Bible, Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. I taught Hebrew at Avondale, I remember. That was not everybody's favorite subject. But anyway, I hammered it into their heads. And then after about maybe 20 years of teaching, I was asked to become an administrator in our education. First a dean in Loma Linda, and then a president at Walla Walla University for about 4 years, and then Andrews for 22. And I ended up about 4 years ago when I got old and decided to let some younger people do the work. And we live in California now, in retirement, St. Helena, California.
What years were you at? What years were you president at Andrews?
Came in 1994 and left in 2016.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
16 plus 4, 22 years, correct.
I've often thought that PUC, Andrews University, Avondale College, kind of shared a different kind of Adventism to some other versions of Adventism around the world. Would you concur, having been to both? There's kind of a unique style of Adventism. And as we were chatting before I went live, I went to Avondale Primary School, high school, studied at Avondale College. My parents were working at the institution. So I grew up with a kind of a different vibe of Adventism, and then went out to work in the world, in the field, and discovered that it was quite different in some areas.
Yeah. Well, I haven't worked really as a pastor, so I can't speak too much about that, but very closely with pastors because of my teaching and the work at Andrews with the seminary. I was responsible for that as well. I think the so-called differences of our view of Adventism is somewhat exaggerated, actually. But I would admit that Avondale, certainly Walla Walla College, Andrews University, the people there were very committed to academic work. And so that perspective would be different from a small church, say, in South Australia or up north or someplace like that. I do see those differences, but I don't see one church coming to expression at Andrews and a different one at PUC and a different one at Avondale. I just don't think so.
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm wanting to avoid the word liberal and conservative, because every time I try and coin someone as being liberal, it's like, well, what, don't pin me down. And I guess theologically, I guess I'm thinking that the theology that I was raised with, and then and met out in other places of the Adventist world, seemed quite oppositional.
Yeah, there may be something to that. I think we can perhaps unfairly exaggerate that, but I will also say where you have a large group of thoughtful people, as on a campus, for example, there will be a variety of perspectives all the time. And if you press everyone working in each of these schools into a corner really hard, that you'll press them away from each other. But if you put them in classrooms in front of a whole bunch of kids who come from all walks of life, they end up sharing a common understanding of our church and maybe explaining it a little differently, but I don't think it's like two different churches or three different churches.
Yeah.
I just never saw that quite.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a good yarn on the sidewalk and you discover that even with different backgrounds, in the end, there's a shared passion or shared commitment that occasionally somebody, pushes a little bit off of that. But for the most part, and most of the time, there are moments, of course, when something blows up or some new idea comes up. But over the long period of time, let's say a few decades, it's there, but I would not exaggerate it.
Yeah, okay.
Any more than looking at evangelists around the world or union presidents. There are a lot of difference there too about how they approach it.
Yeah.
And so, yes, in management style there are differences, and in theology and philosophy there are differences, but there are more things in common, I think, than separate us.
And it's a normal human condition, isn't it, to have many different varying views on life.
Right.
And living in, this is me now in 2025, if you're listening on the podcast. I just want to add a thought there, because what Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen there is saying is pretty much what a lot of the progressive Adventists like to say. This is 5 years ago. But they love to say there's nothing to see here. This is a big tent. We are diverse. We have lots of people in the Adventist church that hold and share different views. The conflict isn't as big as you think. And 5 years later, with the release of this book and it being banned in 6 days, within 6 days, I would love to know what Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen thinks now. And if he's watching, I'd love him to come on the program. But it's the standard thought, and what I've realized is it is one that these guys, the progressive Adventists, the prog-ads, truly believe. They truly believe that this is a diverse church. And my point, and I will get back to the show, but my point is that I don't think they realize that, sure, believe what you want, until you want to say it out loud. And when you say it out loud, this is what happens. Reducing Ellen White to an inspired devotional author will get you chopped in one way or another. And these scholars and academics and progressive Adventists, once they have retired, they speak up more, but even in speaking up, they're still very much, 5 years ago at least, thinking that the Adventist church is a big tent kind of Adventism, that the gospel Adventism is growing and will eventually find a home within the Adventist church. It never has. People have tried, people have fought valiantly, Des Ford, for example, but it never has actually broken through. So I just wanted to say that there, because it's important to note that this was 2020. This is episode 22 of season 2. We are now 5 years later, season 15, episode 1. And I think that a lot of the progressive Adventists, the scholars, the academics, are still in a kind of a denial that this is an inclusive, diverse, that's not my Adventism kind of church. And until they speak up, it's something I've often gone on about, but I think it's a really important point. Back to the interview, back in time to 2020. In Kurrambong here in Australia, we had the Memorial Church and the College Church, and and I would walk around town. And growing up, I had friends that were part of the Concerned Brethren movement, which was very conservative. I had friends that were very liberal in their theology and would have embraced almost the term new theology. And we all got on really well. There was a time period where that kind of diversity in this town was quite embraced, and we'd have our little biffos and our robust conversations after Sabbath lunch. But generally speaking, we got on well because of that common ground that you speak of.
While I worked at Avondale, they used to send me out to speak at camp meetings. You know, if you're a guest teacher in religion, then you get these assignments in different parts. And one time I was sent up to speak every morning at the New South Wales camp meeting somewhere north of Avondale. And somewhat innocently, I walked into the camp and lectured on, there was a morning Bible study. I lectured on something doing with Christ and the Messiah and the Bible and so on and so forth, a series. And in one of those, it became obvious to the people that I was reading from the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Oh. And the next day, the camp was full of pamphlets advocating the King James Version, and that was by the CBs. And I mean, it was sort of amusing. And I remember coming back to campus and saying, so what kind of Bible do we read around here? And they chuckled and explained to me that some people are really passionate about this and passionate about that. But when you got them out of camp meeting and on the sidewalk and I met them, then we were all Seventh-day Adventists somehow.
Yeah. It's interesting because you might know the name O.K. Andreasen, and his brother was one of the guys on Frida for the questions on doctrine, sort of.
Roy Allen, yes, I know him.
And he would literally say to me on Sabbath, you know, oh, your hair's too long, it distracts me from your singing. But I'd bump into him and have a burger with him at the cafe at the takeaway and have a normal conversation.
And I remember the staff on Avondale, when this topic came up or when I came back from camp meeting, they chuckled and said, yeah, right, oh, that's something that means a lot to them, but we have learned to figure out how to live with it. Go ahead and read our Bibles as we always have.
Yeah.
It worked. Mm-hmm.
I sense in the last few years, and particularly since the no vote at the GC, that some of the more concerned folk and some of the more liberal folk are polarizing a little bit. This nice kind of divergent Adventism that I grew up in seems to be a bit under threat. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on that and some of your thoughts on the no vote. Were you there that GC session?
The no to ordination?
Yeah, the no to women's ordination.
Yes, that was the last one I attended before retiring. And what do you want to say about that? I was asked to express myself on that because of some publications that came out. And so I wrote an introduction or preface or something. And I can't remember exactly what I wrote except to say the Bible has always taken advantage of men and women in ministry. In fact, some ministerial assignments or pastoral assignments just require the presence or the engagement of both. Many stories about that. And that has continued in the church. Therefore, the problem with ordination is a bit of an abnormality. And I think transitions are difficult. One of these days, we'll have more and more women pastors in our pulpits and in our churches. We're just getting a new women pastor here in the church we attend up the hill.
Is she ordained or commissioned?
You know something? For the congregation sitting in the pew, it doesn't matter. She's in the pulpit, she visits, she takes care of the children, she preaches on Sabbath.
Sorry to interrupt again, but normally I don't. I remember in these replays, the first couple I did, and then I learned to just sit back and listen. But I do feel I need to comment. To the person in the pew, it doesn't matter whether the pastor is commissioned or ordained. I don't know if I push back on that later or not. Back then, I know in my mind I would have been thinking that. but it matters to the person. It matters to the woman who is commissioned and not ordained. It matters to all women collectively within an institution that suppresses them by not allowing them to be ordained the same as the men are. Again, this is that really interesting way that a lot of the progressive Adventists speak. There's nothing to see here. Does it matter in the pews? Your local church? It does matter. It matters because ordination is being, to this day, used as a weapon of suppression for women based solely on their gender. There was a time here in the Australian Union where of the 23 jobs available, only 10 were available to women because of this ordination thing, because they are women. I totally understand where he is coming from, and I'm not criticizing him or progressive Adventists. I'm not criticizing you individually either. There is just a kind of a collective progressive Adventist speak that just kind of flows from you collectively, that says there's nothing to see here. The things you don't like, you call that's not my Adventism. When challenged to share your Adventism, you seem cautious. And this notion of a big tent inclusive, where it doesn't really matter for now that women can't be ordained, because, hey, at the grassroots level, it doesn't matter. This is why the problems persist, because the elephant in the room suggests otherwise. And when the good people say there's nothing to see here, it enables and entitles those who are committing the crimes, the unethical behavior. This is not a theological issue, in my humble opinion. This is an actual ethical issue. And again, I really enjoyed my interview with Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen, and I hope he comes on the program. The guys who, are wanting to revise Ellen White and put her in a more inspired devotional position, and to say the Adventist Church is providential more than prophetical. That's not a word, I know, but I admire them. I was the kind of Adventist that just knew that one day things would change. There was hope, and it didn't matter as long as on a grassroots level we were accepting and being inclusive. Not only do I think those days are gone, I don't think they were ever here. I think I was offered, the generation above me, the progressive Adventists above me, had either left the church in the early 80s or stayed and offered false hope. So to those watching that are still Adventist and who still want to see these guys not win, but have a home within Adventism, you need to ponder your collective speak, your collective jargon, your collective way of saying there's nothing to see here. That's not my Adventism, but sitting back and doing nothing about sharing what your Adventism is, for being quiet about women's ordination. You guys need to be making a much bigger stir about that. My daughter is 12 now. I left the church when she was about 2 because I suddenly saw that this was not theological. It was an ethical situation, and I could no longer put my name to it. I'm not saying people should do that, but boy, there needs to be some kind of approach that is firmer than there's nothing to see here. And again, just to be fair to Dr. Andreasen, this is 5 years ago. But in my humble opinion, the progressives are still talking like this. And whenever people like myself stir the pot, ruffle the feathers, instead of saying, hey, actually, you might have something that here that is true that we need to actually ponder and listen to, instead of doing that, you get all upset and, oh, stop attacking us. Anyway, I will try not to interrupt. Back from 2025 in time now to 2020. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.
And this ordination question has sort of disappeared a little bit from the consciousness of the pew sitters. I have talked to people about this observation. When I was at Andrews, we had 6 or 7 pastors, and 2 or 3 of them were women, and the rest of them were men, as I recall. At first, when women began to serve, and they offered the Lord's Supper, see, everyone in the pew would sit up straight and look up. There was a woman serving the implements. After a couple of 3-4 years, they didn't even look up from their church bulletin. Right, it's a woman today, next time will be a man. So this is I think the natural development in part of the world, but maybe not in all of the world. And we can push it very hard, and we need to do that if we feel strongly about it, or we can let it develop. And I think many things in our church have sort of developed. Some have been pushed into existence, some have struggled, and some have developed more naturally. And the reason women in ministry will develop naturally is that it's part of our world. And the church is not separate from the world. It's part of it. Women at home, women in the job, women in the professions. Even Ellen White said, more women doctors. I mean, this was part of our thinking. Women in schools. We already have that in many places. So I think that's how this will develop. And in my judgment, we should let it develop and encourage it. Some will say, no, don't do that. But I think it's a natural thing, and it should be done. And it is exemplified in the Bible, I think.
I agree. I think Ellen White was a great proponent and even helped set up the unions in the early 1900s or late 1800s with the express purpose of unions being able to decide on the ground their own unique subcultural decisions and policies. Did it concern you when you saw the compliance document take shape and pass into policy and actually manifested itself with warnings at the recent Autumn Council?
Well, you know, I have a luxury of being retired, so I don't have to engage with every issue that comes up. But I'm Danish, and the Danish union, which is actually not a true union, it's a union of conferences. It's like a little bit like a super conference. There's no union, just churches and a conference called a union. They, of course, have strong feelings on that. And they have a few women ministers that I know of over there. And I think they're taking the position that if women can't be ordained, then no one can be ordained, or no one should be ordained. And some people are upset about that. I don't think it's a huge, big issue. What matters is, do parents and children and the old and the young, do they have a spiritual home that's well cared for? That's, to me, the kind of chief argument. And so I looked in the Bible at one time, and I looked at examples where women played an important role in caring spiritually for the people. And they did it alone sometimes, or they did it in collaboration with men, or men asked for the help of women, or vice versa. It seems to be of a more natural thing, except for the cultural pressures that can develop, both in Bible times and, of course, in our times, and especially for a world church. And I don't know what to do with that exactly. I mean, cultural orientations is something we just can't walk out of. It's like our skin. So it takes maybe some time for that to mature in one direction or another. But I see women in ministry is a natural thing, that we should let the Spirit, let God lead in that, because I think it will come out right that way.
Yes.
And I think we should not be passive, but maybe we shouldn't press people out of their too far out of their comfort level. Let them grow in. And if you have a little patience, which Adventists don't have much of, but every generation it becomes a little different. Not only with women, but with other things that were once important to us, and now we have learned to deal with it. So there is the generation development too, and women ministry is maybe one of those. Let me tell you a story about that. I was in Denmark not some years ago, visiting my widowed mother. She was 87, I think, at the time. She died at 99, not so long ago. And she was in the kitchen peeling potatoes for our dinner, and I was sitting at a kitchen table going through the mail that just was dropped through the door. And there was a magazine sent out by the local Lutheran church cathedral in our town. It was just for everyone, a little sheet that came around. And in that magazine, on the back, it listed all the pastors, the bishop, and then the under bishops and 6 or 7 pastors. And I said to my mother, look, there are 7 pastors in this cathedral church, and 2 of them are men, the bishop and one other. All the other ones are women. What do you think? She said, the times are changing. We have a woman elder in our church, no pastor, and that's just how things developed. And I thought, if you don't offend her too much, she comes around to that, and she saw that was good for the church, and she really appreciated the woman elder they had in her church because she looked after the members. That's what matters.
I think when you see it as a trajectory that's upward, you can say to people, well, it's going to happen soon, it's going to happen in its time and God's time. But I think a lot of women that I've spoken to since the no vote, and some of them were in their early 20s when they first were really supporting women's ordination and the equality for women in the Adventist church. And the no vote to them, and some of these women that were in their 20s are now in their 70s. And so for them, their whole life has been existing within a framework that doesn't honour them as being equal to men. They cannot get the top jobs in the Adventist church.
That is another matter. They can be presidents of Loma Linda University or Andrews, but not as
they wouldn't be able to be GC president, for example.
Oh, that's not possible.
And so when you see the trajectory growing, and then you suddenly see the no vote, and then you see the compliance document, and then you watch the Autumn Council, there are some who would say this progress that will eventually happen, which I agree with you, is a natural occurrence for these things to kind of bubble to the top. They seem to be almost, there's an adversarial kind of position now from the top level leadership that seems to be taking us backwards, not forwards.
This vote was anticipated for decades. I remember when the GC agendas came out prior to this one. Should we vote? Are we ready? I mean, it began in Holland, I think, many years ago when the GC was there. I think it was a mistake, the way they voted. But then again, if you have one vote, one member, then the votes are what they are. You could maybe hold some of the leaders responsible for trying to steer the vote. That I would not do, but I do want to respect people try to vote. I try to educate them to vote well. But you know what? That's true about political situations too. I have many things to say about American voters right now, and they don't listen one bit to me. So yes, if we do things by vote, we will be disappointed, and then we charge ahead, and next time it will go better.
It was an interesting moment.
But meanwhile, the seminary at Andrews, where I worked for all these 22 years, welcome women, and we have a good number of them, and they got positions in churches. They would like to be ordained, and some were and some weren't, but they were welcome, just like men.
And is it Sandra Roberts? She's the president of the conference there or something?
Yes, in southeastern California. That's the Loma Linda area.
Yeah.
She is, right. And she was voted by the constituents. So.
Yeah, it's just a sad thing, but I hear what you're saying. It was interesting when Jan Paulsen spoke up at the Autumn Council, and he almost saying, I beg you to reconsider this. And Ted Wilson said, well, you guys voted it in.
Well,
And
I'm sitting next to him at that time, so we
were
talked a
you
little bit
really?
about, and I won't tell you what he said, but
Go on, give us some hot off the press.
absolutely no chance. But he felt strongly about that. He's Scandinavian. And I had an interesting conversation on Scandinavia with the union president from Denmark, whom I met accidentally at an airport, going to meetings. And I said, so how is it in Denmark now? Are we ordaining or are we not? And he told me that they had actually had some discussions with the General Conference Legal Council and with legal experts in Denmark about churches ordaining women or denying the ordination. And he told me, not some years ago now, 5-6 years ago, that the legal advice in the country of Denmark to stay compliant with the law and so on in the land was this: if the Adventist Church makes ordination of women a theological point, then the church has a right to pursue its own theology without interference from the state. But if it's not a theological point, then it becomes an employment issue. And employment-wise, you cannot discriminate against women in that country. So we are caught in this. And I think we should find a way to normalize that. So either it's a doctrine, which it is not. I mean, we never managed to make it a doctrine. So it's an employment practice. Then it really should respect the employment practices of a country, as we do in this country. We have to do it. We are in the world, but not of it. So we have to obey.
I remember that when equal pay began to start to reach parity, it was only really brought about when Mary Kay de Silva, was it? I forget her name. When she took them to court, they settled out of court, and pay was suddenly came like logs in the water. Maybe it's going to take some women taking the court to church over this.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I do remember working here in this state of California when the equal pay came up. And I tried to understand why the church could be so far out of step. And then, of course, they lost the legal position and had to pay equally. And I remember some people told me that the church was still operating out of a different world when they employed families. They had not thought about single people in those days. There were spinsters and could be maybe church school teachers, but nothing more. But everybody else was really a family, and they paid the husband, and then they paid subsidies for housing and this and this and this and this. And suddenly that changed. And now they employed women parallel to men, and somehow they made that employment change without following the employment regulations of the land. And that could have been avoided by a little forethought. It was foolish. And then, of course, we had to correct it with some embarrassment. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I fear that it's going to be one of the only things that'll make things change.
It could happen, but it's been talked about for many years, and it hasn't become a legal issue. I think that the states, the governments, certainly in Scandinavia, are hesitant to invade the church because they believe in freedom of religion and separation even more than in America. We talk about it, they practice it. So I don't know that will happen, but I think it's good for the church to keep its conscience clear and clean. And so we can hold our heads right up, and we do the right thing by everyone, young and old, men and women. I think now it's the racial issue. We have to do that.
Yes.
So for this reason, we should do it.
Well, I think there was a time I remember listening to a podcast, and a well-known Adventist historian, I can't remember the name of the podcast. I'll try and type it down below because it's well worth listening to. And he was recounting a time when and I might be wrong on the details, but the gist of it was that a union president who was African American, and one of his pastors from the union went to the GC in the late 60s or early 60s, and they weren't allowed to go into the main cafeteria. They had to go to a separate black part of the cafeteria. And nowadays that would just not happen. But back then, because of the times, the church had to kind of bow to the pressure of that kind of segregation, I guess.
And not only the church. I'm a graduate of Vanderbilt University. That was segregated about a decade before I got there. How is that possible even to think about it? But that's how much the human family changes in just a relatively short period of time. They were, of course, wrong and embarrassed by it, but it's true. That's what happened.
And maybe we'll be embarrassed to look back on women's ordination in 10 years' time too.
We probably are a little bit embarrassed now already.
I've been super impressed with the Scandinavian approach with all of this. They're not fearful to step up to the plate and speak. I loved watching the Danish guys, and I think there was a Norwegian guy there from the union or the collection of conferences that you say, and they got up to the microphone and they spoke very honestly about what they felt on this topic. Is there something about Scandinavian upbringing that encourages this kind of honesty and authenticity?
I don't know.
The leaders on our side could learn from the Scandinavians, I think.
Well, we can learn from each other, all of us. I think I would say this, that the Scandinavian position, as far as I can tell, and I grew up there, has not been taken in a spirit of rebellion or opposition to the church and its mission. Nothing like that at all. If anything, the people in Scandinavia and the church are trying very, very hard, because it's very, very difficult to reach out to the general population. There's some movements underway now, have a general revival of religious interest in Scandinavia, and that's a good thing, both for the Adventist church and for the other churches. So I don't think it's that. But there's something else about Scandinavia that does not exist in this country and not quite in some other countries where I've been, and that is an absolutely colossal commitment to equality and evenness in the population. You know, there's a Danish writer who once said Denmark is a country in which few people have too little and fewer still have too much. It is a taxation and a social responsibility or social network that has caused that. And so if you grow up in this environment and you deal with children issues and women issues and education for all and health issues, right, then women, of course, they have their place too. How could they be different from other people? Exactly. It's just by birth, you know, they were born this way or that way, but they're all human beings. And in a sense, they have developed that over many years, which has made them economically and socially and in every other way countries of equality. Of course, there are flaws and mishaps here and there, but on the whole, that's what it is. It's very difficult to be rich in Denmark, and it's very difficult to be poor. Let's take care of you.
Interesting.
And so this, I think, is the mentality. It's nothing to do with being mad at the General Conference. It's just being fair-minded to every member in the church, whoever, young or old, children, whatever they are. That's it.
I have a great deal of respect for that attitude, and I think good on them for speaking up. And I didn't take, when I heard their speaking up, I didn't feel that they were being disrespectful at all.
I don't think they are in their hearts. They just want to be fair to everyone.
Yeah. One of the guys mentioned about just being true to his conscience, and when it's such a part of the fabric of the Scandinavian society, it's almost...
the conscience is shaped by this kind of environment. You meet it the moment you go to school. We have an expression, we have an office in America and in other countries called ombudsman. I don't know if you've heard about these people, but we have one at Andreasen. You have them in many organizations. That word is Danish, actually.
We have it in our society in the legal realms.
So what it means in Denmark is that there is someone appointed, generally a lawyer or some official, by the government, but independent. And his office is the office to which you write or telephone if somehow you have not benefited from that which everyone else in the country benefits from. Say, electric lines are going out. and your house is at the very end of the line, and somehow electricity didn't reach your house. That occupant can write the ombudsperson and say, hey, you forgot me.
Yeah.
And he will go to the government and say, wait a minute, everyone gets power. What about this lady? Put the strings out to her too. That applies to all areas of life, not only public services, but education or ill people or handicapped people or getting access to schools or wherever you need to get access to. Everyone gets that, and it's just part of the national conscience and psyche there, and it, of course, it invades the church. It should.
The GC may need a new office, an ombudsman office.
Well, that might not be a bad idea, come to think of it. Or they could spend a summer holiday in Scandinavia and see how well it works.
We'd all like that.
Yes.
We're gonna shift gear and go to Glacier View, which is the alleged main topic we're supposed to be talking about.
Now it was an excuse for getting me on the line.
I think it's been important to unpack some of what I believe are the ramifications of not dealing with Glacier View successfully. We're going to keep having these kind of 40-year cycles of conflict. So it's important to address what's happening right now so that we can try and avoid it in the next 40 years. So the Danish and I think 6 unions were warned. So as we leave this topic, what are your thoughts? They've been warned. The next step is reprimand. The next step is sanctions. What is there going to be a wind back of the compliance document, or what time frame have the Danish got to get their act together?
I do not know the answer to any of those questions. I'm retired and active in the local church, but I do not know what's happening in the conference, the union, and the general conference, except I still care about it a lot. And occasionally I write a piece for the magazines and so on. But so I don't know that at all. I have no idea. But I think it will be consistent if the leadership in Scandinavia, the church leadership, will keep what we say plowing corn in America. You keep the ministry, try new things for the young people, try to provide services for the many, many old members they have in the church, try to reach the public in various ways, and even work harder perhaps than they have in the past to make an impact on the society from the Christian values and our faith. I think that will happen. I don't think they will mount any kind of a defense or attack against the GC. They will just say, we will follow the church programs as best we can, men and women, boys and girls, young and old.
So for a while they
may be wrong on that.
For a while they may well have to follow Ted Wilson's counsel and ordain men again and just commission women.
Ordination of ministers is not really a biblical thing either, you know.
Unless it's used as a weapon.
Well, yeah, we use whatever.
Then we should take notice.
But being called and being trained and prepared and equipped with gifts, these are really important biblical concepts. And I think it would be unwise if we're so eager to push our workforce into new areas without dragging along the calling, the preparation, the equipping with the gifts of the Spirit before we launch in, because ministry is not easy. And we just had a big scandal here with some former Adventist publishing things in newspapers, which is very embarrassing, I think. And
I heard about that.
Yeah, people didn't, how they got up to that crazy idea, I do not know. But that cast a little bit of a shadow over our church, especially for the people locally. And we need to avoid that by equipping people and making sure that those who speak for us do it correctly according to our theology, yes.
Otherwise it's disingenuous.
Well, it hurts. It can hurt for decades. And I had to tell you that, but this happened in the town in which my university, where I studied, PhD studies happened. And I would be embarrassed to go back and tell them, here I am a Seventh-day Adventist. And they'll say, oh, you were on a newspaper, were you? I said, no. And of course, the church has denounced it. That's the right thing to do. But you can't just get rid of all the rubbish left behind in the streets. That takes a while to clean up. So, yes, calling, equipping, preparation, and commitment to the task. These are really important things in my mind.
I agree. Yeah. One of the genuine reasons that I am carrying out these interviews is I find myself at an age where I've seen enough of the looping, the endless kind of tension that seems to date back to the release of Questions on Doctrine, where some of the nature of Christ was shifted because we won't go into the details because you know it already and we've discussed it at length in other interviews, but there was a bit of a dividing moment there where the church wanted to be seen as a little bit more evangelical, so some of their doctrines and ideas were watered down. Other things were emphasized, and in some ways that book created a fertile garden for the growth of a more divergent kind of Adventism. From the release of that book to the early 80s, the church grew from 1 million members to 4 million members. So it kind of worked, and it was GC approved, this book. And I don't think he was a relative of yours, was he? Andreasen, the famous theologian that opposed the book?
That is a good question. When I worked at Avondale, one summer they sent us to New Zealand to speak for camp meetings there, first in Christchurch and then in Auckland. And in Auckland, we were in a big tent, 5 holes, and I think there were 5,000 people in there. After my sermon, on the way out, they wanted to shake hands and ask, "Are you the son?"
The son of Andreasen.
So I know something about the Adventists in New Zealand in those days. That
Yeah.
interest displayed that. No, he was Danish and same name, but not same family. My father met him once and they talked. And since Andreasen is not a really family name, it's a first name, the son at the end. You don't have to be in the same family for having the same name. But it's a fairly rare name. Not many people have it. So it's natural they would think so. But no, I never met him. He died in California before I came to America to study. So I never met him.
So it was his opposition to this book that really birthed the Concerned Brethren, the Standish brothers who were quite young, spread that concern throughout the States, throughout the world. And so we have this beautiful garden where diversity is kind of embraced and encouraged, sanctioned from the high levels. But we also have within this garden a very focused group of people that wanted to get their church back, so to speak. So we have an environment that cultivated the likes of Des Ford, but also cultivated the likes of the Standish brothers who opposed this new theology. Would you say that's a fair assessment that may have led to the actual Glacier View event? That warring of opposite sides?
I don't know how to answer that question with any degree of confidence that I'm doing it right. I do know about Questions and Doctrines. In fact, it was republished, as you know. And there was a conference held in the seminary at Andrews University while I was there over the republication of that. And I remember the leadership of the General Conference was somewhat concerned about bringing that up again because of the controversy it caused in the first place. And there were some of the participants whose names you mentioned were there. I think by that time, the church, most church, the bulk of the Adventists had settled on what the atonement means and what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And therefore, this conference was, in the end, more of a curiosity or a review of historical past. That probably was important. I think after the war in the 1950s, I think the Adventist Church was asked, and it needs to answer the question, are you Christians like other Christians, or are you somewhat sectarian off in one direction? And they answered that in a way that I think was not entirely satisfactory, but the answer developed into something more satisfactory in the decades to come. And since I'm a teacher by trade, how many students have been in my class, and how many of them came with that misunderstanding? Not too many. They had already, by that time, by the 70s and 80s and on, they had sort of figured it out, I think. So I would not particularly bring that argument back to life, because I don't think it really has much to give us.
Perhaps not for today, but did it inform the narrative of Glacier View?
Well, it may have. I think it's more complicated than that, but I'm not an expert on that Glacier View. There are some people who know much more than I do. I was there, but I didn't keep up with that event subsequently, as others have been writing about it and so on. But I remember not so very long ago meeting or sitting next to a woman at a meeting, actually, where some of these things were talked about. And she must have been about my age. So she was young, in the 70s and maybe 60s. And she told me how much she appreciated one thing that she learned from Des Ford. And she explained that before she learned that, or before she heard him preach, actually, she was frightened about her salvation. She was afraid of not being ready when the day came. She was afraid about what they were looking at up in the books in heaven. She was afraid she wasn't good enough, and her parents and her school teachers probably had made her insecure. She was an insecure Christian. And then she heard Des Ford preach, not about the sanctuary particularly, but about the cross of Christ. She said, he spoke about the cross, he spoke about Jesus, he spoke about justification. He gave me assurance that I'm good enough to come to Christ. He introduced us to singing Wesley's hymns. This sermon and this impact on this person was enormous. And though it's only one, and anecdotes don't make statistics, I think that kind of impact has been, perhaps, in my opinion, the most influential and the most positive of the contribution that Des Ford made. And I remember when I worked at Avondale, students all around, and so we were preaching. It was in a gym before the church was built.
Yes,
and I preached sometimes, and Des preached sometimes, and a student looked at me and said, tomorrow is Sabbath, Des is preaching, you got to be there. And it was not to hear about controversy with the church, it was to be brought to Christ. And so I've heard that from a good many people who weren't in the theological turmoil, but who just were thinking about their own Adventist faith. And Des's sermons and emphasis helped her a lot. And she said, I'm now a believer, always have been, but I'm secure. I'm not going to bed afraid that I won't wake up. Jesus is my friend, and the cross is where it all happened, and I'm eternally thankful for that emphasis. That's what I hear now that people are saying. And I think that's an important thing, and it probably should be, in my mind, put out front.
What's been coming through very strongly in these interviews, this is the 21st in the series of Glacier View Reflectives. It was only going to be about 4 or 5, but because of the positive nature of Des Ford's influence, that's why the interviews are continuing. And some people I've spoken to have almost been in tears as they recount how beautiful the gospel sounded from the pulpit when Des was speaking. In fact, I interviewed Dr. Kenneth Samples a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And he was a protege of Walter Martin. And he said, and he's not an Adventist, never was, but he said that the gospel, according to Des Ford, was the most well-articulated form of the gospel he'd ever heard.
Yeah, I think it was, he was a good preacher. In fact, in Glacier View, some people and I were talking about whether we could somehow capture him as a preacher for the church on that area. Now, when I was at seminary, there was also Ed Heppenstall, who was a sort of a teacher of Ford, I think, at an earlier stage. And he had the same reputation students would come to chapel when he talked to feed their souls. And I don't know how many people have been blessed that way from these individuals, but I think that's an enormous debt of gratitude that many people have, because there was some controversy and because some people got sidetracked into something different and they became afraid. And when believers become afraid of God, it's not good for their faith. And Des and Heppenstall, for that matter, and many of us try to say to them, you can go to bed tonight and you are secure and safe in the hands of Christ. They said that. And I remember being somewhat puzzled. This may come back to your earlier question. When people have talked to me about that, and they still talk to me about it in some places, and I said, so how did that happen? And then they told me about their youth Adventism, how it was when they were young. And of course, I grew up in Denmark, and that's a Lutheran country. And so one of the heroes we studied in Danish school, public school, it didn't matter, religion classes in public school we had, it was about Martin Luther. And I best like to think of himself as a Martin Luther. Here I stand, and so on. Well, we heard about the real Martin Luther from the time we were very young. And what we were told is that there's grace in heaven, there's grace with God. You don't have to buy these indulgences, or you don't have to crawl on your knees to Rome. You say your evening prayers when you go to bed, and God accepts you. This was something I learned from the Lutherans. And it didn't get derailed when I came to an Adventist school, which was at Newport. Somehow we had good teachers there too. And so I never personally experienced that fear of being afraid of the investigative judgment. When does your name come up? And it is a peculiar American sort of sidetrack that happened at some point, and we couldn't get off of it. Well. And it could be we owe a debt to these evangelicals who said, all right, you Adventists, come clean. Do you really believe you're saved by grace through Jesus Christ? Or do you have another agenda under the table? And it forced the issue. And I think that may be good. And when do you hear a sermon now that doesn't speak about grace? Well, I don't know, maybe some places, but where I have been, it is the grace of God through Jesus Christ that is, and coming to that point, I think it's been good for the church.
When Walter Martin, just before he died, though, he often commented that he felt the wool had been pulled over his eyes a bit, and that Adventists were still relying a little bit on the works-based faith.
I think you're right, and I have read these pages and questions on doctrines that were answered there, and I have been trying to figure out why that was so hard to say for these people. Okay, Martin or we get it. And Sister White said it, on 1888 said it, and Heppenstall said it many times at the 1950 Bible conferences. But he read his paper, very influential. And then Des came, and many other people have come to say that, especially youth pastors. They had nothing else they could say that would be listened to for a while than that. So I think there were probably some people who had lived in the church for a long time, and they were just afraid. Probably it was fear. Afraid if you're too much focusing on the grace, you'll get lost in grace. That you cannot. We have 2,000 years of Christian history, and you can never get lost in grace. But I think they were afraid that the church may, instead of growing, might shrink if we don't hold on to this stuff. But fortunately, the people who are wise about it stuck with the cross and with grace. Occasionally they meander a bit, but then they come back to it. If not, the young people will bring them back and say, remember what you committed to. This is what we believe in.
Some of them might be afraid of losing their job too.
I don't know about that, but I think some people, that's not a nice thing to say, but I think some people really are so committed to the church. Look, they work for it. They were first educated in it all these years, then they work for it. They socialize with their friends within it. They die in it. They retire in it. Their whole social and cultural and religious and personal and economic life is tied up with the church. And you get a lot of sort of automatic commitment to that. And if somebody that is piddling with it and maybe bringing it down, the whole life goes away. But if you are with Christ, I think, and with the gospel of grace and assurance, then these things are not so important, and you're not afraid of them. You're not afraid that the church will go down any more than you're afraid that you'll be lost in investigative judgment. You're not afraid that. You're assured in faith. And I think some people were just afraid. I've heard some people say some things about these matters, and it seems to defy logic. And I would say, why would smart people say something that defies logic? Well, if you're afraid, you'll say all sorts of things. Just to feel safe again.
Do you think
I'm preaching to you? This is what I think about it.
Oh, yeah, and you're preaching to the choir. I often I kind of ask some hard questions, not to clarify some answer for me, but because I know those questions are being asked. Do you think if the church is serious about moving towards this grace-based faith that you're talking about, and that I embraced as a young man, that they could maybe release the great controversy and kind of water down some of the chapters that are in there, because it's still an official release, and young people or people who come into the church brought in by the Sabbath and health and grace and Jesus first, then they go and read the great controversy, which is still hugely promoted, and they read the chapter in the Investigative judgment and they start having heart palpitations. Why hasn't the church removed that chapter?
I don't know the answer to that, but I have heard, and I haven't confirmed it, it may not be true, that some of the reissuing of the great controversy in parts of the world has been done in abbreviated form. Maybe they didn't take out investigative judgment, but I heard something about the Catholic movement has been modified. I heard about that in Latin America, but I haven't actually checked up on it, so I don't know. But I think another way to find out what really matters to the church and what's super, super important, listen to sermons. What do we say when we speak to each other? And so when did you hear a sermon on the investigative judgment and being afraid? I think we agreed in this conversation that it would be pre-Advent judgment, not investigative. That may help a little bit. And somebody said, and it's not a judgment on people, but on behalf of people or for people. So we tried to change that, but there was fear, I think, of dropping that concept, because it's been part of our culture for so long. I presume so, but there were serious attempts in the Daniel and Revelation Committee, which I served on, that met for decades, not for years after.
Is that the one where they didn't keep any minutes?
No.
Which one's that?
The first Daniel and Revelation Committee.
Oh, yes.
All the papers went into a shoebox. And the second, and there they were in the archives, until the second committee started after Glacier View. And after 2 meetings, the shoebox papers were brought out. And we looked at them and discovered that they talked and this and that, but it never was brought to any kind of a focus. And so, but in the new committee, which didn't really deviate too much from the traditional interpretation of things, I don't think. But there was this concern about the fear factor. And this investigation was just bothering people, and they said, let's call it something else. But I noticed in the statement of beliefs that it's still there. So we're still afraid of what will happen if we let people off the hook and send them to bed all afraid. What will happen the next morning. And I think this is not right. It's not biblical. You shouldn't do it.
I agree. Back to Glacier View, and I think too there seems to be different versions of the sanctuary as promoted by the Adventist Church as we go through time. So let's just look at the generally held view of the investigative judgment at the time of Glacier View and leading up to it, and Des Ford's view of it. I know he changed later in time. I know the church has kind of shifted a little bit on its stance. Currently it's a bit unclear what the official policy is on the sanctuary, but at that time it was quite clear that there was a more great controversy version of the investigative judgment, and there was a Des Ford's version, just to generalise. So at the time, and that particular version, did you find yourself in alignment with Des's view of righteousness by faith and the sanctuary?
That's two questions, and so I need to give you two answers. On the first one, yes. And I would add, Jill put a question down about a 1983 meeting, and I don't remember exactly what it was in 83, but there was a meeting around that time in San Francisco of a small group of people, including Des and Jill and 3 or 4 people from the General Conference. And I was there, and Smuts was there, and some other people that I can't remember. And that was to be a conversation. And I remember one of the first comments made was by one of the people representing the church, either Biblical Church or General Conference or Seminary, but one of those people said, for starters, there's one area in which the church and this are in agreement. That means there are many others where we are not, but he said, that's what he said, there's one area. And so we looked at him and said, so what is that? And he said, righteousness by faith. The St. Paul. So we cannot have a disagreement on that.
Who said that again? Sorry, who said that again?
Yes, one of the participants.
Oh, right.
One of the participants.
One of them.
So
yeah.
There were about 7, 12. I don't know how many people. Jill would remember. And we were sitting there in this hotel talking about it. And to start the conversation, everyone, who starts and what do we say? And one of the brethren, as we call it, started by saying there's one area where we don't have a dispute, we have agreement, and that is righteousness by faith, which is what we've just talked about for a while. And there we are in agreement, and not long after that, the Review and Herald published, as I recall, a whole issue on that topic, which was a way of saying, yes, St. Paul taught us that, and yeah, that's where we are. So I didn't have any question about that at Glacier View or before or after, because it's directly out of Scripture. You cannot give that. The matter of the sanctuary and all the stuff around it is a little more complicated. And I think that in this area, I don't know if I'm right. So if everybody listens to that, I'll tell them that I'm not sure I'm right here. It just seems to me that the big difficulty was not the organization of the sanctuary in heaven, 1 room, 2 rooms, curtains, and all of that, because people said different things about that being symbolic or real and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that was a big troublesome thing. I think the big problem was the impact on one number, 1844. I think that is such a defining number for the church, and what to do with that if it goes away or if it is something else than what we thought it was. I think that was a big issue that frightened people. I remember when I taught at Avondale, Des Ford taught Daniel and Revelation to all the students. He had hundreds of students in his classes every semester, so many that he couldn't read their papers. And so Norm Young and I were assigned to split them up between us and read them. So we did. Service to the department chair, I think, for free. And one thing that amused me more than anything else was to notice the many different ways in which students spelled apotelesmatic principle of interpretation. They all wrote it down and they didn't know what it meant, most of them. And so I said to myself, no, I don't think that's helpful. And I don't think that was kind of a key to rereading Daniel and Revelation. It was supposed to offer a solution. And I thought, well, if students can't spell it after a whole semester in this class, probably it's not a good key. So I have questions about rereading all of that and redesigning that partly biblical and partly historical doctrine. I don't claim that we have had it right all along. I mean, we've changed the Ottoman Empire and all that, King of South, and still fighting about that, by the way. Is it the Muslims, is it the Catholic? What is all of that about? So that I don't have confidence that we have it figured out, and I don't have really confidence that they said it figured out for time and eternity either. It was struggling, and I think I understand what he was trying to do. I think we talked enough about it that I would do that, and I think I have some appreciation why that was troubling to many other people there, and so that's, to my way of thinking, for Adventists, that's something that still has to be studied. I just read a book that somebody published on Daniel 11, 400 pages, and I thought, can it take so many pages to explain what was shown in that 10-minute vision? And so that suggests to me that probably we'll be studying that for years to come still. Haven't got it figured out. So, yes to the first, not sure about the second of your questions.
Were you at the actual meeting, October 27, 1979, the famous forum meeting that kind of spread around the world on cassette tapes?
When I was in Avondale, we were called to work at Loma Linda, and by the time Des came here, I had moved to Loma Linda and served in the School of Religion there.
Did you hear the tape later on? I
think I did, but that's 40 years ago. I don't remember all of it, but I believe I did. I think it was widely distributed, and since I knew Des, I would have listened to it.
Why do you think Neil Wilson was kind of really keen to draw a line under the topic and almost end debate on the sanctuary argument? There seemed to be some kind of political manoeuvring going on there.
I don't think I've ever talked to Neil Wilson about that, so I wouldn't know. I was sitting next to one or two Australian church leaders in Glacier View. That's true. And you talk between the meetings and with the meetings. And I don't remember who they all were, but they were people I knew because I'd worked in Australia. So at camp meetings, and so I met all these guys. And I sensed in them a real deep concern of the divisions and hurts and stuff that went through, I understand, many churches in Australia over that issue. And I don't really know what particular positions each one of these people took in the confrontation in churches, but I heard from these people that it's very, very difficult. Their members, we are responsible for that. They're pastors, they're old pastors, they're young pastors. That means we have to think about the future. That's the next generation of pastors. How do we work through all of that without maybe understanding all of the fine points? That was a concern, and I didn't think too much about it at the time. I just remember there was a position there, and they were afraid. What do we do? And I only really began to get some appreciation for those kind of fears and concerns a few years later when I became a dean, and then for many, many years a college president. Black doesn't become white when you're president, but the task of dealing with them changes a bit, because suddenly you're responsible for thousands of people. Andrews University, I don't know, 3,500 students and 1,000 employees. If something goes wrong, whatever it is, a lot of people will be without bread on the table, and you are responsible. So you look at things not only theologically and theoretically, but how do you manage these things and help people get through it, hopefully with their feet down and their head up. That can be difficult. So I don't know how much that played a role. I'm just suspicious that if they thought a theological discussion would have resolved that, they probably would have done it. But I suspect they thought, no, that's not the way to solve these problems of membership and budgets and arguing and closing churches and all of that stuff. I'm guessing at this point. I'm just thinking maybe that was important. And for academic people, I remember from my years as president, they don't see that. Oh, so it's either this way or that way. Come clean, man. Yes, but it's either this job or that job. So how do I manage to keep the two of you in the same department if you're fighting all the time? Think about it.
Yeah,
is what I would say to them.
Very difficult.
I like both of you, and I don't really want to have to make these impossible decisions if it can be helped.
Yeah, exactly. And I still have very close friends that are very conservative, and some are very liberal, and we have lunch together. We enjoy each other's company. But once you start having a movement that's got to have political systems administered, it can be complex.
And I don't think we Adventists have really faced potential issues like that.
No.
As our church is growing to now, they say close to 25 million plus the children around the world. We hear rumblings of conferences and unions that don't follow policies, and they do this and break away and this and that. Not for theological reasons, perhaps, but maybe sociological reasons or economic reasons. And I think there's a lot of that. And I'm not sure we have taught ourselves how to approach that. I once proposed we should have a law school and train a whole bunch of church diplomats who understand the church and its mission and dispatch them to troublesome areas and try to sort through some of that before it breaks us apart.
I agree. One of the things I loved about Jan Paulsen's presidency was that I felt he was sending a very clear message that all divergent peoples were welcome in the Adventist Church. I don't think that that message was clear from the presidency of Neil Wilson, and I don't think it's clear from the presidency of Ted Wilson that that's the case. Why do you think current union leaders, conference leaders, division leaders are reticent to step up to the public podium and say, we accept both of our left and right brothers and sisters in the church? There seems to be a little bit of silence about that.
Yeah, that may be. Now that I'm retired, we invite people to have dinner, and I can assure you they represent the full spectrum of church members. And we sit around the table and we talk the whole evening, and conversation always has gone well because of this kind of respect for the hospitality of the table. And sometimes I've felt if you have a disagreement you want to resolve, have dinner with that person. Something about breaking bread. I think we should do that.
Amen.
I would say one thing that happened, Jan Paulsen, before he became president. I remember that report. He was sent as a kind of church diplomat, and I think he was good at that. He was sent to South Africa to help the church figure out a way to be a single church. That was with the fall of the apartheid and the new political arrangement there. And I have heard and read that to this day, there are still some remnants of this to overcome. But it was the kind of thing that I think leadership should do as a white church and as an African, bring them together and say to them, you've got to do that. I mean, Jesus brought all his disciples to the Lord's Supper, so you come and eat with me. And then recognize that there will be some spillover. There will be some stuff on the floor to be swept up afterwards. That's okay, because we're human and it takes us a while to figure it out. But it should have cleared this position, I think, for the church. You can't have two different churches in one country.
Exactly.
All the other denominations had changed to one. You have to do it. And so I see these things could or should be addressed with an idea of inclusivity. And I think that gives strength. If the family is together, that gives strength to our conversation about our theology, right? So the family has an easier way to talk through some of these difficulties than people have if they're not sitting at the same table. So I think this is correct. And I do remember with pleasure, long after dinner conversations in our house at Avondale with Des and Jill and some other faculty persons, and it went from dinner time until 5 in the afternoon, and we all went home. And we disagreed on many things. And I'll tell you one, because that opens a window. We were talking about righteousness by faith, and we all agreed that was important, because St. Paul said it is, and so we took it from. Then what do you do with the Christian life? do you have obligations or what? I said to Des, he was lying on the floor with a pillow under his head. I said, Des, what do you think about Christian ethics, like biblical ethics? Oh, I said, no, that's what you do, not what you believe. I said, yeah, but you have neighbors, you have to live with them. How about Christian ethics? I still think that's an important subject, hand in hand with righteousness by faith. I think so. That was not preached so much at Avondale, but I would introduce a class in Christian ethics. How do you not lie? How do you take care of your neighbor? How do you share your property? How do you take care of your parents and things like that? And then the Sermon on the Mount, which is the New Testament text. I think we should preach Christian ethics along with righteousness by faith. Those two would help some of these conversations.
I agree.
I'm preaching it.
Yeah.
That's what.
No, you're not. I love it. And I think the thing with Christian ethics, it's not a salvation issue. And I think the problem that some people have taken with the sanctuary version of Adventism in the past, maybe, and still
it is a fact.
They see it as a salvation issue.
Yeah, it is a fact of the Bible that in both testaments, but even in the Old, salvation came first. I mean, God did ask the Israelites to leave Egypt, and He didn't say, "I'll bring you out if you promise to do this and this and this and this and this and this." He simply said, "Come along. We'll meet at Sinai and we'll figure it out how to be a community." So it is true that the grace and the free salvation comes first, and there are no conditions, but the other follows because we have to share the water and share the manna and share everything, and we have to do it right, otherwise we cut each other's throat, and that cannot be right.
And that makes good sense, and to me that's the teaching of Jesus, that's the Bible, that's the judgment. Why did we need 1844? Why was that kind of an additional sort of adjustment to the atonement and to the answering of these Christian ethics?
Of course, we didn't come up with that. Wasn't he? What was his name? Miller.
He came up with the idea of Christ returning.
Well, no, with the date from the Bible. And so I don't know anything about Miller, but I have noticed. I recently read a big book called Dominion by somebody or other, talking about the Christian impact on society and history and culture for 2,000 years. And so I was reminded that these concerns about when the world would end and when God will do another invasion, that have come up, periodically every 500 years, and people have been curious about that. And so when I'm in a good mood, I will say to myself, well, Miller and his friends thought the world was full of rot and God must be getting close to doing something. And so you start looking and you find things, prophecies and this and that. And then you start calculating and this and that and the other, and you make up something. And once you do it, it's been done many times and nothing happens. Then you forget. But in our case, a church was born shortly thereafter. And that's why 1844 is a very live issue in our church, because we are the church that was born out of that.
Because it's providential.
Well, you can say many things about it. Something happened in heaven, but something happened on earth. We started building hospitals and schools and evangelizing and sending missionaries everywhere very shortly after 1844. And curiously, it took about 20 years to make a conference, I think, or keep us a name, and 10 years after that to start the first university. So education was important, as was health. And so it, in a way, it kicked off a lot of very interesting activities. And we look at these activities and work them backwards. And that's where they started. And so it's easy to say get rid of it, but it's not so simple, because all the things that is ours now grew out of that root.
Did Ellen White's early visions confirming that October 22, 1844 was a supernatural event, did she just misunderstand those early visions?
I don't know the answer to that, but that's a very interesting question. But I think, I just remember reading the early vision when I was a student. It seems to me she was a very committed, earnest, deeply believing Christian who were longing to see Jesus. And how do you see Jesus? Well, you go up because he's up there. So I don't have a hard time understanding how longing for Jesus takes you on a trip up to that. And then she saw it in vision. But I don't know much about how that vision came to her, and I don't remember that. It's been a long time ago, so I can't really answer your question. But I don't doubt in my mind that she had this experience, and it became determinative for her for a long time to come. But as she got older and time was passing, she had to adjust to that too. I mean, her husband died, and her children, some of them died, and then she got old, and yeah, that happens.
She adjusted, but she never lost the belief that it was a supernatural event in heaven that night.
Yeah, well,
is it possible to be?
I don't have any insight into that.
Is it possible to be a Seventh-day Adventist and just appreciate the providential nature of Adventism and not believe anything supernatural happened in 1844?
Well, I once wrote an article on that because it troubled me, and this is what I suggested, and I don't think it cut any ice because it was published in the Adventist Review, mind you. But I got only one letter from the readers back saying something about it, positive as it turned out. But I was thinking about this: what happened in 1844? Something in the sanctuary upstairs, or something on the earth down below? I think the first pioneers thought something would happen on the earth, and then it didn't. And then it said, no, actually it was supposed to happen in heaven up above, you see. So that was, I think, roughly speaking, the argument. And I thought about it, and I said to myself, curiously, when the sanctuary doctrine is first introduced in Scripture, in our Bible or interpreted by Adventists, but also interpreted by other biblical scholars, the sanctuary always had two poles, right? There's the heavenly pole and the earthly pole. That's why when you built temple towers, you had a sanctuary on top and one at the bottom. And when Jacob had his ladder, right, the top was in heaven and the bottom was at the stone, Bethel, the sanctuary. So there's always two parts to it. And so my thought was, well, if we want to talk about what happens in the sanctuary, we should expect it to happen in God's presence and in our environment, because the sanctuary is a kind of form of incarnation, isn't it? I mean, God comes close, and there's a connection. The heavenly become earthly, and the earthly becomes heavenly. I mean, that's a symbolism. It goes back to before the Bible, to antiquities, this concept, and we have it. So I said, well, 1844. You should expect, if something happened in heaven, you should expect something on earth. Otherwise, you can't really believe anything happened in heaven, because in God's economy, nothing happens up there unless it happens down here. Well, we can't see into heaven, but we can see into the earth. So what happened? Well, these people started getting busy, and they preached everyone. Then they started having missionaries going out. Then they started Andrews University. After a few years, with just a few hundred members or whatever they had, and no money in the bank, they started a university, which they said would be equal to the University of Michigan. That was a bit preposterous. But they started this massive, Battle Creek was the biggest hospital in the east of the Mississippi. I mean, it was a big thing. They started all this on earth. And we can say they were just clever people, or we can say, as Sister White said, inspired by God. That was his sanctuary activities, and he set us to the task here. And so I wrote that because I said, if you think nothing happened, just look around you and you'll see a lot of things happening beginning at that time. And someone wrote back and said, yeah, I see that. And the rest of them probably didn't see it and didn't make sense to them. It doesn't make sense to you, perhaps, but that was my offer on that topic.
No, I agree with you. And I'm often told, and even in some, I'm looking at some of the questions and comments, and there's people that would say to me, Peter, just, that was then, what relevance is to us now? And I get that, but for some reason, like the Mormons have wonderful churches and missionaries and health and family. But if I was a Mormon, I wouldn't be able to get that original false teaching out of my gut. I would just keep referring. That's just the kind of person I am.
Yeah.
And so in some ways I don't lean to either side. Like I agree that, yeah, let's just get on with it and follow a good Christian life and enjoy the education system and the hospitals and the beautiful camaraderie that Adventists have. But I also see the other side that are going, you guys are taking our church from us. We believe that something definitely happened. We believe in probation. We believe in that Sabbath is going to be a test of salvation. We're going to have the end time coming very soon. For them, they're very concerned about it. For the liberal, they're less concerned about it. For people like me in the middle, I can go, well, I can see why you're concerned about it, and I'm wondering why you guys aren't concerned about it. Not to form my own narrative, but just as an observer.
I think maybe I understand what you're trying to say. I happen to believe that the Sabbath is a kind of test of our faith in God, but not in a sense that if you don't observe it, you go to hell. Or if you observe Sunday, because that's what you do, you go to hell. It's a test of our loyalty to God, because it's an invitation to spend time in God's presence. And if you don't do that, it's like saying sort of goodbye, I don't have use for you. But if you observe it, then you are inviting God's presence in your life on a regular basis. So it seems to me that I would not be critical of the Adventist emphasis on the Sabbath. A lot of people see that as a great blessing, and it's a spiritual blessing as much as a physical one. So I think that's something to be grateful for. Somebody once asked me along your lines, what do we do in, say, a church like our church, when you remember people, or the historians in our church are writing books, biographies, these old pioneers and forefathers and long ago, and some of them were Unitarians and some were Trinitarians, and some thought that the Ottoman Empire would bring the end of the world about, and they had all these kinds of ideas. And you could say, why didn't they think normally, like we do, out of the textbooks, not out of the newspapers? What was the matter with them? And so it's easy to be critical of them. And I would ask myself, so if we hadn't had these sort of outrageous people who had very daring and avant-garde ideas about things that may have been wrong, but they were passionate about, what if they all disappeared and we had some milquetoast kind of people in our pioneer circles? Would we have had a church? Or do we have a church because these were driven people? And it doesn't matter if they understood every prophecy correct, but they were driven towards God, and to bring this community around them, with them. And I think a lot of what we see today in just membership, you say in a mission field, how did people join the church? Well, somebody, a missionary or a leader, was driven to say, we owe that to God, and you will be blessed by this, and come and join us. And if they had some wrong ideas about the investigative judgment, or about this, that, and the Ottoman and the Turks and all of that, eventually that washes away as time passes and time changes, and the momentum will continue. And my concern is not so much strange things that they taught back then, but some strange things that we do now to slow down the momentum, which I think is a good momentum. And the fact that other churches have something similar is a good thing, I think. I remember
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Adventist Church had a strong 5-day program to stop smoking. We don't have it anymore. Why not? In this country, because the Surgeon General has said don't smoke, and the legislator said you can't smoke. So now we have a lot of allies, and we don't have our program that made us famous, 1 in 10,000 or whatever it was. And it was a big thing. Adventists show that smoking kills you. And now everyone shows that smoking kills you, and we should say, great. The more the merrier, in these good causes. And
Mm.
I would say the same for health. I would say the same for education. And I would say the same for social services and mission services and ADRA. I'm glad we have 2 or 3 other big NGOs to help with this. And the fact that we have company doesn't make our contribution less valuable.
Agreed. And I actually believe that often the ends do justify the means. We all grow from ignorance, and we all hopefully grow towards loving and caring for our fellow human beings on the planet. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I think that's a good point to always remember. And I think interesting what we were saying about Christian ethics and Des Ford's life. When you look at his whole life, he lived the life of a man that followed the Christian ethics, didn't he?
Yes. So why wouldn't he include it in his sermons? I mean, he probably would. But as we talked in our living room that afternoon, he said, no, don't take me there.
He probably wouldn't have, because people would have said, you are preaching works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I said, no, Des, it's not works. I'm preaching responsibility, Christian responsibility, as Jesus said, when you walk on the road and somebody asks for a coat, give him your shirt too, that kind of thing, which is, the Bible is full of that. And I think it matters that we pay attention to it.
It concerns me that people coming into the church and growing up into the church constantly come to this wall, though, where, this loop I've been talking about, it's like, and again, the reason I have these conversations is to stimulate conversation in other circles and to stimulate a notion of, let's try and resolve this once and for all. And that's a naive view, of course, but at least having a conversation is an honourable desire to see some kind of healing and restoration and rejuvenation and reinvention. When Des was, about to kind of sign off on I think it was the 20-point document, at the last minute was thrown in the 10-point document that you mentioned. Dr. Norm Young was one of the 6 or 5 contributors to that document, and that was really the nail in the coffin for poor Des, because he was willing to agree with the 20-point consensus, but obviously the more drilled down points that were raised in the 10-point document, he was unable to sign with a clear conscience. So that indicates to me that, again, at a political level, there was a real desire to kind of to squeeze him out. What were your thoughts on that?
Well,
because you were there. Some people are asking, were you there? And we've established, yes, you were at Glacier View.
I was there, but I was not part of the production of these documents. I've heard other people talk about it, that there was a big document that might have brought parties together, and then it was rewritten in the last minute to another document that there was no agreement. I do not remember or know. I probably knew at one time to make a responsible comment on that. I just don't know. I do remember walks the days we always walked along Door Creek. And
everyone talks about Des walking. Here's the walk and talk with Des.
In fact, my theory is that if he hadn't walked, he might not have lived so long, but he wouldn't have had so many disagreements, because he walked with the brethren and they came to speak to him, and he walked fast. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes, yeah.
So you had to be in good shape to keep up with him, and he talked at the same time. And I think the brethren could not talk and walk. So he only talked to them and they listened, and they got more and more annoyed. So walking is maybe dangerous. In any case, I think that in some of the walking conversation I had, not particularly with Des, but with friends, Des and other friends walking together who knew each other from the past, there was a desire on the part of his close associates, and Ed Heppenstall was there, by the way, and he made comments too, that Des had lifted the bar of what he expected pretty high. I wouldn't say he was wrong. I'd just say, he had expectations of what he could agree to. And I think there were some other people who thought, well, do we have to sort it all out here? And one of them, I think, was either Ted Heppenstall or another one of these people said,
I think
yes,
Johnson thought that too.
I don't know about Johnson, he was there, but when they ask you a question, try to answer it, but don't preach a sermon, because then it becomes complicated. So there may have been something in the just conversation and communication that was not favorable towards bringing minds together. In fact, I think you may stand back and say, well, the two sides were too far apart. There's a limit to how long a bridge you can build by words. So that may be, I don't know how to answer that question. But I think if there is some distance and people are not hearing each other, I would have thought at some point a mediator would have been helpful, perhaps, who could say, what is it really that matters to you? Why is that such a concern to you? One time when I was working in Loma Linda, there was a big fight, not about theology, but about money, which is about as serious as theology, between an academic director and a business manager. And they just shouted at each other. They could not see eye to eye, and they thought one of them had to go. And somebody came to me and asked, what do you think? I said, I don't know, but if you give me 2 weeks, I can probably figure out. And I would do shuttle mediation or shuttle diplomacy. And in that case, there was a point at which both could stand. But it may not always be the case. I think this meeting was too big to create that sort of thing. And I think it could have been structured maybe that way. And even if it had not worked out to bring the sides together, I think the two sides would have understood the other side better and would have been less inclined to spend the next 40 years taking shots. I mean, sometimes you have to leave each other because it just doesn't work. But hopefully you can leave with a mutual understanding of what it is that bothers the other side. And whether that could have been done, I don't know, but that's the method I would have proposed if I had been invited to participate in those discussions.
Yeah, I do get the impression from chatting to Norm Young and to Pastor Bill Johnson on this series that they too would agree with you there, that there could have been some mediation and also maybe a little bit of a desire to go a little bit slower. I guess, though, that for people like me, that you start to get older and you think, boy, is this ever going to change? I've been told the carrot was led in front of me all these years. It's going to change. Hang in there, Pete. It's changing. It's going to change. And then it's actually not changing. And when I see this divide between the two that we just spoke of, are they any more ready to come to some of these conclusions than they were back in 1980?
Well,
if a Des Ford came along right now, would your advice be, hey, let's just go a little bit slow on this one? They're not ready yet.
No, I wouldn't give any advice to that, but I would observe that I think if history continues, there will be other theological discussion. And this business of ordination has gripped the church, ordination of women, but it has not had the same impact on our shared faith like the 1980 discussion had. It's more of in some ways, it's a policy issue that has got some theological interest, but even those people who are dead set against it, they just don't like women in the pulpit. I mean, I don't think I've heard cogent argument why this is a bad thing for the gospel.
No.
Jesus would not like that. I've not heard that. So, but there will be these, and there will be others that will come up, and they may come to this. There are other ways in which issues like that sometimes find resolution, and that is by neglect. I mean, they just don't carry the weight until somebody pushes them very hard in somebody else's face, and then you have to respond to it. So there's subtle changes happening in the church. And in some ways, they're not any better because they can happen by neglect and we are all the worse for it. But I also think there are likely to be some more organizational challenges in the church. I mean, just look at the statistics. Where are the members? What are they thinking? Where are they not? And what will that do to keep the church in balance? Where is the money flowing? Now, I remember 50, 70 years ago, every spare dime available in the church coffers would be sent to the mission field because we had to finish the work before Jesus could come. The last financial decision I have read about in the General Conference, other than the virus decisions, which is going right now, but the last one was, no, we need to keep more percentages, more millions of dollars in the home field because we're falling behind. And the mission field can grow without our financial aid. That is a completely new way of thinking about church money. And it's not because we're mean or evil, it's because the way the Spirit moves the church, the members are no longer where the money used to be. The members are where the money is not. And so we have to deal with that. And I don't know if that change has yet soaked in. It soaks in when it impacts pension plans, retired pastors, salaries, number of ministers, church roofs that are leaking, and the money goes someplace, and this, that, and the other. When these pressures come, then suddenly we may have to have a Glacier View on just how to organize ourselves and fund ourselves responsibly and take care of all the children in the church, wherever they live. So I think the opportunities to solve problems are enormous, and problem solvers would have a good future in the church if they have a chance. And it may be theological, but I think more in ministry. I think of China, what's happening there. It's complicated to do ministry in China. Just to teach pastors is complicated. And now with US-Chinese scruff, this will not make it any easier, I don't think. And so this is where I see possibly challenges coming. And the solution to these may mean that we all have to step back a little bit and say, okay, if I have to make some priorities, what comes first? And I may not to get to number 5 or 10 sometimes. And in theology, I think for a Christian, the gospel, the cross of Christ, has to be put on the top. And the rest has to shake up and shake down until it fits in. And I think I'm thankful that I think the church has figured that out. It may forget from time to time, but I think it really has. And then underneath that, we will find things in their proper place. And that may be complicated as we think of the world church.
Do you think the compliance document is an indication that they have worked it out, though?
I think that's, I don't really know.
I'm just looking for the silver lining of these indications that it is working out.
That's what I have discovered in management. Whatever you manage a university or a church, and you have these challenges, and you come up with big solutions and big ideas. You put them down on paper and you drive them a little bit. And the test of a good manager is somebody who knows what really has to be pushed and what has to be allowed to drop off the desk.
Yeah.
And there's some of these documents that maybe have some life and some excitement now, but they may not have longevity. And I don't know which ones they are, but I have discovered there always some like that. Let me tell you a story. I was at Andrews University and I got a letter from the highest level of the General Conference about something they didn't like. It was not a big thing. It was just, and I thought, what do I do now? These are my bosses. And I have the campus to worry about, and the students had different ideas, and the faculty thought it was sort of silly. So I called a wise counselor in a General Conference, and I said, so what do I do with this? And he said, do you have a pile on your desk of lots of papers you haven't got to yet? I said, yeah, always. Put it at the bottom. He didn't say, toss it, put it at the bottom. That means that is not a priority for me, and it shouldn't be for you. And so I put it at the bottom, and there it still is, and the thing went away. So some things we have to allow to go away, and a wise manager will discover pretty soon what has currency and what does not. And I would not be terribly surprised if some of these documents either morph into something else or just in the excitement about finding enough money in the COVID-19 economic setback, maybe we just don't have time to worry about that.
Yeah.
We get stuffed off to the credenza somewhere in the back. And that is not an altogether bad way of solving some problems.
And can I say, one of the things that I greatly respect about you is that is how you led your team, your staff at Andrews, and the way you did that is very commendable, because so many people who have had an Andrews experience have benefited from the influence you have had over Andrews. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I'd hate for people to think I'd hate for people to think that I might be asking some hard questions.
No.
With that, I greatly respect the model you talk about for the Adventist Church is how you lived your life in your career, and I think that's a great model to follow.
It's of course not only the church; it is life.
Yeah.
But sometimes the work in the church, which is sort of inside the walls, make you blind to the larger assignments of being a leader amongst people. But I've discovered that church issues and solutions to church problems are not dissimilar from the way they appear outside, certainly in education. What happens in higher education in North America will be on Andrews campus within 6 months. So you may as well look outside the walls and see what's happening.
Yeah.
And the same, I think, is in conference work. And look at the people, visit them in their churches and see what they're bothering with. Ask about the sermon topics they haven't heard for a long time, and then you can preach it to them. But if they don't ask about it, they're not really bothered by that. And so you can gauge a little bit where the people are and how you can shepherd them in a most effective way.
And I would challenge anyone that is sitting back in their armchair offering up criticism to actually go and experience some time as a manager, even managing 2 people or 3 people, and then come back with your words of criticism.
And I think being a pastor is a tough job in what we call the developed world, certainly in Europe, United States, and Canada, and here and there in Australia, where you are. And so I have an enormous respect for pastors who are standing in front of these people Sabbath after Sabbath and trying to get something into their hearts and heads when so many things are pulling in different directions. It's very difficult. I think they need all the support we can give them. So, yes, I would say so. And of course, for institutions right now, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but higher education in the United States is just counting the losses, not the gains. I read yesterday that University of Michigan, close to Andrews, just sold bonds for $1 billion. That means they took up a $1 billion loan just to protect themselves a little bit for the next year. $1 billion.
Wow, incredible.
The enormously complex world in which we live, and now pastors and getting church offerings and getting the roof fixed and preaching to people and getting the young people engaged. This must be a very difficult job. So rather than criticizing, I'm inclined to say, Pastor, what can I do to give you a push?
Yeah. One of the sad, and I appreciate you taking this time, because I know, we may never get to chat again, so I'm just trying to cover all the bases. Sure. One of the things that I think wouldn't happen now, but did happen post-Glacier View, was as ministers were fired, defrocked, statistics show and studies have revealed that a way higher number than normal Adventist ministers left due to the Glacier View outcome and the treatment of Des Ford. These guys were kind of pushed out, forced to resign, resigned in disgust, were fired, and there was no follow-up for them. There was no, how are they coping? Are you guys okay? And I've discovered in doing this series many Adventist pastors who left at that time who are still reeling and still feeling the pain and the hurt. Were you upset emotionally at that time when you saw all this purging of Adventist pastors and their families and their children? Did that concern you at the time?
Yes, because some of them had been my students.
Mm.
They were the senior students, so they became pastors after Avondale, and this happened a couple of 2-3 years after, and on. So I actually remembered being told about some names, and I recognized them from my classes, that they lost their position. I think there were some in the United States also who aligned themselves in different ways. And I have heard from some friends from Australia who know many more than I knew, who have been deeply grieved over that. So that was very sad. And I don't know enough about who they were, how many there were, and the processes followed to offer an opinion about how it should have been handled. I've been in the management too long to try to second guess that. But two things. Historically speaking, there have been breakups in the Christian church. It's not an Adventist thing. And there's been in the Reformation was not only the Lutheran one or the Swiss one, there were Reformations in the Catholic Church before that time that led to divisions and departures and anger, and sometimes years ago, and actually wars. The 30 Years' War was fought over something like that. So there has been that, and therefore the Christian church should think about the fact that if we disagree and treat each other badly, the fallout can be very, very hurtful. We know that historically speaking. Therefore, when these things come and knock on our door now, I would say we try our very best to keep the family together. And if we can't, then we try our very best to help them land in a place that gives them more comfort. I would not be so naive to think that we can talk our way out of all disagreements. I don't think so. It doesn't happen in business companies and in human services activities, in politics, in education. In these places, sometimes it's just the best way for everybody's mental health is to have a parting of the ways. It even happened in marriages, the people who love each other. And so what do? Start a 40-year war after you divorce, or try to, for the sake of the kids, to do it in a decent way. So not to be naive about it, but then when it does happen and you don't find a way out, there are things one can do, I think, to be as helpful to people who are caught between what is most important to them and what is not important to their supervisors, as the case might be. And I think in a church, just like in a family, you have to think about the children a little bit. It does matter what happens to the parishioners.
Yeah.
And that concern or that burden falls sort of equally on both sides, I think. I mean, both have a concern.
Very good
and
point.
So I think probably, hard as it is, cases are individual and probably should get some individual attention. It's the same when you have a department, an educational department in a college or a university, and things don't go well in the department and students are damaged. So what do? You reassign or push away, and sometimes you say, well, your contract has to end. I'll help you find something else. This is something that does happen. Whether it was done the right way in Australia, I don't know, but it sounds like it was rough. And I feel badly for that. There should have been a way to do that in a more understanding fashion.
I think as well.
I think people who understand faith, what is it exactly? I mean, it's not just a bunch of doctrines. Personal faith is something that's deep inside, and it's not unrelated to questions and doubt. It's assurance, and in spite of those things, it's a very strong and personal experience to go through that. And I think people for whom faith is personal that way are more understanding towards those who are caught in that kind of a disagreement. So
I think, like people, and I see it in the comments, people are saying things like, "Well, I didn't have any nightmares about probation when I was growing up, and let's kind of not talk about 1844 because we've got more important things at hand to be dealing with." And I agree with all of that. But when you said about it's the children and the families, that's what really touches a nerve with me, because as an observer, I go, well, okay, well, let's not talk about 1844. Let's not talk about probation closing and those that do have nightmares over it. And let's just get on with life and be nice and happy about it and focus on other important things. I'd be happy to do that. But as an observer, I notice that because of these very things not being addressed, the church just comes back to a wall again. There's a collision. And again, there's people leaving, people being hurt. So I don't want to put my head in the sand, but I do love exploring the ideas that you're presenting that offer, in many ways, solutions for a way forward.
There is a kind of an issue, I think, for Christians, certainly Adventist Christians, who have a hope for the future, and that is, how do you become part of that? And how do you lose it? I mean, I think that's probably why this business of the judgment, investigative judgment, you have to figure that out. So you investigate who are on God's side and who are not. And there are the stories in the Bible of the angel giving crosses on people's forehead and so on. So I understand how that gets started. And you may say, there's no way we can extricate ourselves from that. And that will always be a burden, and people will rebel against it, and some people will embrace it and use it as a weapon against somebody else. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking of the German Reformation, which I grew up with the consequences of that in Denmark. They had this purgatory thing. I mean, it was an awful thing that the church were taking money from people to get their relatives out of the frying pan in purgatory. I mean, you'd say, can a Christian church survive that kind of mismanagement of people's lives? And Martin Luther said, he laughed at it and said, no, it's nothing to do with anything. But it was deeply ingrained, and for 200 years, people were still worried about if they'll go to heaven or hell. Maybe not purgatory, but heaven was still there.
Yeah.
And it's only recently that most Christians have figured out that probably that's not the way faith is driving us. And therefore, I sense that the younger set, and everyone, of course, gets older, and then there are other young people come. There will always be young people. I think they're saying, we have figured that out. Yes, there is responsibility. Faith, there's cheap faith and costly faith. What did you say, Martin? Dietrich Bonhoeffer? And faith is not cheap. It is expensive. There are obligations that go with a Christian life. And we have figured out that, yes, there are these ethical and moral obligations, but we are separating that from the, what should I say, dispassionate, disengaged activity somewhere upstairs that can surprise us by suddenly ship us off to purgatory or to some other place. The Protestant, the Lutherans in Denmark, long ago figured out that it had to do with the way they understand the world. And the purgatory is not underneath the surface of the earth, underneath this mountain over there. So that conceptual thing changed, and then it became part of their life, their moral life. And I don't hear any Lutheran in Denmark talk about purgatory, but they did 200 years ago or more. And I think the same thing will happen. Responsibility, which is judgment. I mean, this is part of the Christian life, but the fear that makes you go to bed at night scared that the angel will come past with the wrong kind of in the middle of the night. I think we are growing out of that. And if we don't push it back on them, but encourage them in their faith, I think they will say, thank you. Jesus is my friend. He's given me a way to live my life responsibly, but trusting in him and forgiven when I blunder, which we will all do all the time. That's the pathway which I think is opening up. It has opened for most Adventists, I think. most. But there are some that linger, and I think it will open for them as well. Maybe after 2 well-placed funerals.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, and I'll just, because we'll wrap it up soon. There's a few questions that people are asking here. I'll just kind of throw out at you, but I think you're right. But I'll just add a comment that Peter Mashenko has written. I don't know why thoughts on what might have happened in 1844 should have anything to do with our faith, if faith is defined as trusting God and Jesus our Saviour. And I agree with that, and people will agree with that sentiment. But when my little girl comes home from school, when she was just turned 7, and she's saying to me, "Daddy, at night, I can't remember some of the sins I've done. Will I get into heaven, Daddy?" And I've not been teaching her that. And I haven't really seen that kind of Adventism until recently rear its head again. That does concern me, and that puts me in a position of going, well, I think this should be talked about. And then she said to me, what is sin?
No, you're right. And if she learns that in school or Sabbath school or whatever, then the community should to bring that up. I fully agree with you. In fact,
so I think it's important to go, well, it's the concept and the principle is that 1844, whether it happened or didn't, I get that it's about Jesus. But when people are pushing a certain belief that they have surrounding 1844 and their version of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment, and it starts impacting on my little girl, well, then I do think it's a relevant thing to question.
Yeah. Well, there's parental responsibility, and a date in history that started the movement should not be a frightening thing. It's like the American Declaration of Independence. I mean, it started the country, and people did some pretty stupid things in those days. So right afterwards, they had slaves. It was terrible. But it started a country that eventually got rid of slavery. There is a text in the Old Testament that is worth contemplating. It may contain the earliest confession of faith. And it tells a story about a man and his daughter or son going to the sanctuary to worship God with an offering. And as they come to the altar, the child says to the father, "What in the world are we doing this for?" And the Bible instructs the father, when that happens, drop your gift before you come to the altar and talk to your child, and this is what you must say. And then it quotes, "A wandering Aramean was our father. And he went down to Egypt, and God saved us, and God brought us into this land, and God gave us his promise, and here we live, and that's why we do these things." That may be the earliest confession in God that exists in the Bible, like a statement of belief, the earliest one possibly, and it's mentioned in Deuteronomy. And it puts a kind of a burden on the parents to make sure that the kids don't misunderstand the offering, which is feeding God who is hungry. So whatever people thought in those days. No. It's a story of a pilgrim, a migrant, our forefather who came from this country, and he went here and went there and went this, and here we are now, and that's why we do it. I think this kind of confession of our faith, 1844 we got started, and this happened, and we are here, and that's why we do these things, may help the young people understand that we're part of a history that has responsibilities and has promises coming in the future. I don't know if that's useful to you, but that was an instruction in the Bible.
Yeah, I think that's...
So don't say your prayer with your daughter before you explain why we pray. That's
exactly,
really what it's saying.
Oh, yeah. And I was able to have a good conversation with her about it as well.
Yes.
So, Andrew Skeggs writes, "The pioneers were imperfect yet driven." That was a comment you made, and what a great insight. And then Brian says, "But Catholics would say a great movement arose out of St. Peter." I wish SDAs could acknowledge their history is centered on the cross, the firmest foundation.
Well, we would agree with that, wouldn't we? St. Peter means one of our heroes.
Yeah. Graham writes, "Why is there still such animosity towards Des?"
Well, Is there?
Well, I had an email to me.
Sorry, I've not heard it.
Yeah, I've fielded several
No.
emails almost
Mm.
daily,
Uh-huh.
calling him, you know, an abomination. You know, that he was influenced by the devil, and these are not from people that are just conspiratorialists. And if you look on YouTube, you'll find lots of people that are, you know, speaking not so kindly towards him. But they're also not speaking kindly of the One Project and other people that are perhaps presenting a more
Yeah.
Christ-centered focus.
I've always thought that Christians should be courteous and not just right or strong.
Yeah,
And that may be a sin we should ask to be forgiven.
yes. I think that's a very important point. Kindness, courteous, civil. Another
Is a
question. Sorry, what was that?
Civility is a Christian virtue.
Yeah, yeah. When you explore in the Gospels the teachings of Jesus,
He was very civil.
so many gems there, aren't there?
Yes, more so than Paul.
Mind you, I did like that he cleared the temple with his whip and sandals. I think that's got to happen sometimes.
Happened once, and all the other times he was extremely polite to people.
Yeah. Lance writes, the omega of apostasy. I think he's referring to the fact that a lot of people that are more conservative are viewing the views that you and I are expressing as being a sign of the shaking that Ellen White talked about, that we are actually the omega of apostasy. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know anything about you. Alpha and Omega, I guess, is what the first and the last apostasy. They talked about that when I was in college, so it comes all the time.
There's an incredible revival about that, you know, coinciding with a lot of Doug Batchelor's teachings and 300 and this kind of thing.
I don't want to ridicule people who have ideas, but when I was in Australia, I went to Canberra one time and met a lady, and she showed me her bank card, and it had a B on it for bank card, and she said, oh, this is actually not a B, this is a 6. So this is the first of 3 6s. And I said, sister, no, this is how you get money out of the bank, and let's read the story of Jesus. And she said, okay. After it.
And Lance just cleared up there. He was meaning that some people say that Des is the omega of apostasy, while Kellogg was the alpha.
Oh, okay.
Graham has said, last generation theology is on the comeback. What do you have to say about that?
Well, there's been book written on that. I haven't read them, but I think the seminary published one, and wasn't it George Knight who published another, and pointed out that that this is a wrong thing to do. I don't think we can persuade people who are interested in that not to do it, but it is somewhat narcissistic.
In many ways, Ellen White taught the last generation theology too, though. She had a meeting where she said people in this very meeting will either see Jesus come or be food for worms, and when later people tried to rationalize that, they pointed to things that she had said, that if the church had followed the three angels' message more accurately, the Lord would have returned by now, which implies that that current generation, if doing the right thing had occurred, Jesus would have returned, which is kind of last generation theology in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, if you said that, she was wrong, wasn't she?
I like it. Do you think, here's another question, do you think the denomination treated Des fairly?
I don't think it treated him kindly. Fairness is like a legal perspective on things. And I'm not tried to, he did, she did, to try to count up the things we've said about each other and done to each other in a way so I don't really have a good way of saying fairly. I think I would probably not want to express myself on that, but I think a lot of kindness and courtesy and consideration was lost in this exchange. I met with Des and Jill some years after in somebody's house. I mean, they lived in California at the time, and we had long conversations, and they were not always easy because there were driving points in the book of Daniel, chapter 11 and chapter 9, and I've already told you, I think these are interesting things, but we've said so many things about them over the years that I don't want to be nailing myself down to something that I don't think so. Some things are clear and some things are not. So we talked about that, and fortunately, we were good friends. So we could talk in Christian courteous ways with each other, and it was okay. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What do you think the official basis was for Des being fired? What was the official statement on that?
Well, that is written someplace, and I don't know what it says. There must be somebody who wrote him a letter of his discontinuation, and I don't know if it came from Washington or from Australia. I just don't know.
Yeah, we might be able to ask Jill to...
Somebody would know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just going through a few questions. I think you raised earlier about the 1983 meetings with Des. Can you just unpack a little bit more about, because you were there, what I think you mentioned earlier, that Jill had raised with you. What were those meetings, and were they designed to try and get Des to come back to the church, were they?
I couldn't say that, but I was invited to one meeting. I don't remember the year, but I remember more or less who were there, and it was built as an informal meeting to try to talk in a small group to see if there was some meeting of minds. So that was after Glacier View, and probably while Des was still employed. I don't really know that, but there were about 6 or 7 people, maybe 9, and it was.
Do you remember who was there?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember who was there?
Well, Des and Jill and Bill Johnson and I think Gerhard Harsler, maybe somebody from BRI, whoever was in charge of that. A couple from Des's circle, Smuts van Rooyen, I think, and one more person. And I was there, and I don't remember the rest of them. And it was said that we should not make it a public meeting. They won't have a quiet meeting without pressure from outside. And what struck me, and I never found a resolution. So we all promised that we would go to the meeting place. I mean, I promised, and I kept my promise. We'll go to the meeting place, and we'll spend whatever 2-3 days talking through some of these things. And Duncan Eva, I think, was there. Maybe. Seems like I remember him. And after 2 days before the third day started, there were people walking outside the hotel with sandwich boards on them, announcing the meeting, and I don't know what else they were saying. And I remember the ones who called the meeting were somewhat disappointed that we wouldn't have peace to do that, but maybe whatever happened, I do not know. I never found out. And it was that meeting at which somebody from the General Conference said, well, we can start on one area where we all agree, and that is the message of righteousness by faith that Des has preached about is one that the Church General Conference we agree upon. And we all nodded, as I recall, and said, yes, indeed. It may have been the Review and Herald, and maybe Bill was there, because that's, I think after that came out the big issue which say the church stands for righteousness by faith. And I can't remember the dates, but it seems to me these events are somewhat connected. And then from there, the conversation went to other things. And the positions, as I recall, hardened some, but I couldn't in my mind, with any assurance of being accurate, try to describe that. It's just too long ago. But the first comment I remember, there may have been a worship before, but the first, because I thought, well, maybe that's a good place to start. And I happen to think it's important because I must confess that of all the people who talk to me about these days and Desmond Ford and what he has done and so on, the people who have expressed the most appreciation and the most alignment have been people who talked about that topic. Justification by faith, righteousness by faith, grace in our lives, and the assurance in salvation. This, more than anything else, that's what I've heard back.
That
Very
ongoing
few
legacy.
talk to me about, yes, that's what he'll be remembered by, I think, by this group of people. The other thing about how to interpret Daniel and Revelation and the sanctuary in heaven and all of that, I have not heard too many people bring that up, but you just said in Australia that may be a little different because they were closer to it. So I'll accept that.
Right. Did you hear Elders Eva and Spangler give an apology to Des and Jill as to the way Glacier View was handled?
Was that done in a public meeting?
I'm not sure.
You know,
they go on to say the Americans would have had more meetings, but Parmenter insisted.
Well, I don't know about that.
But Parmenter insisted Des be dealt with that week.
The only thing I can say to you in response to this is that now that you mention it, it does seem to ring a bell way back, but I just don't have a clear fix in my mind on that, and I'll have to leave it at that. But if somebody has evidence of that, I would say I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
A couple of quick, more rapid-fire questions, and one I think you've just answered. What do you think the enduring impact is of Des, and so the ongoing impact? What can we be thankful for? And I think you just answered that one. The Review and Herald said that the church took away Des's ordination, and they actually declared, I think in writing, that Des was an apostate. Do you think Des was an apostate?
I don't know exactly what that is, but no, I do not know anything about his relationship to the official church. Someone told me, and you can confirm it, that he was considered a member at the church here, that he was not disfellowshipped from the local church. But I don't know that for a fact. I wasn't here.
I'm pretty sure. I interviewed him just before he died. In fact, the first 3 interviews of SDAQ&A, the podcast, were with Des, and before he died, about a year or two before he died. And he mentioned, and he cleared that up. So if people have got a question, I say go and listen on to the podcast there in episode 1, 2, or 3. And my understanding, and Jill can correct me, was that he did remain a member until 2006-ish, until he actually took his name off because he was going to be doing some work for a interdenominational company or something. I'm not too sure, but there is an explanation for that in those first 3 episodes. This is a young person, and I know them very well, Andrew. In fact, he's my neighbour. Well, his parents are. And I think it's a good question because we went over the last generation theology thing fairly quickly there. He's asked, do you believe we need to do better to correct people that believe in last generation theology or a similar theological understanding?
Well, the concept of disconfirmation of prophecy. The theory is that people who have religious convictions hold them very strongly despite the disconfirmation of them. that's been shown, that's a sociological study, and in some ways it's a good thing, because it really means that believers don't drop their belief, hardly ever. There are exceptions to that, but many just keep their belief. So if someone believes very, very strongly that this is the last generation of Christians or Adventists or human beings to be alive in the world, or whatever that doctrine is you're talking about, if they believe it very, very strongly, how do you correct it? I mean, you can say, not in our church, not in our publications, you don't write it. You don't write it in the newspapers and attribute it to us, Adventists. But to take people's conviction away from them, no matter how strange it is to us, is very, very difficult. And perhaps painful as that is, it may be a good thing, because we don't want people to come to us and say, we don't think your belief in the Sabbath is really worthy of anything, so we'll take it away from you. And we would, no, that's not to be taken away. So if we claim for ourselves the right to follow our convictions, which we do and always have, religious freedom is really important. Our teachings as Adventists is important. That's what makes us. Then we may suffer a little bit by allowing others to keep their faith, even though we know it to be wrong, or it bothers us a lot. We cannot stop talking about it, and I would say we use teaching rather than political power to change that, I think. And I think that's what we do probably by publishing articles and books saying, wait a minute, this is not part of Adventist faith and we should not go there. But how to stop it, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think what is concerning the younger people is, as they watch the compliance document gain teeth, they're a bit concerned with the idea of, well, who decides what's on that document? There's 5 or 6 things on there now, but who's deciding that? And I think that's the great thing that Ellen White saw. She didn't want this kingly rule over the Adventist Church. She wanted to break it up into the unions, and I think if the top level leaders followed that, I think the church would benefit.
I sort of agree with you on that, but I know I don't disagree with you on that challenge and how people feel about it. However, we have a very big church organization around the world with 23 million members plus the children. So we're about 30 million family of 30 million. There's going to be a lot of different ways of doing things.
I agree.
Holding elections, different ways of using money. I know a little bit about that because I used to travel for Andreasen a general conference, and I know there are places where by mismanagement, millions went down the tube. Maybe not deliberate, but carelessness or mistakes or self-centeredness. And so there are
Look
times...
at Davenport.
Well, yeah, I don't even remember that hardly. It happened last year. I mean, it's recent, or a few years ago. And so an organization has to figure out a way to manage that. And sometimes they say, you can't belong to us if you do business that way. Or we try to keep them in and say, well, you have to change the way you do business. If you're not, we'll put you under administration. Now, if you have financial interest in a union or mission somewhere in the world, you can say, unless our financial treasurer of the General Conference or division comes to oversee your books, no more appropriations. That's a bit tough because some pastors are not going to be paid. But I'm struggling with that because I have not only a theology background, but a management background. And so you have these things. So the question is, when do you use this kind of authority? And to use it at the expense of women is unfortunate. But to use it against careless financial managers or contractors or people who put some of the money into the campus and some into their pocket, or people who elevate their relatives to positions in the church, or whatever stuff happens in a big organization, both the church and outside. I can understand how we get into this, and it takes some wisdom to figure out what are topics that ought to be pursued with some central authority, and what are the topics that have to be allowed to develop themselves sort of from the grassroots up. That, I think, is a trick.
I agree. I think in a church that's so big, we've got to expect a multitude of different views. But I think
we have many more different things than we admit to. We just don't hear about them.
Yeah.
This doesn't get reported, but lots of stuff happens.
I think, and someone's mentioned here that last generation theology has led to some people suiciding, so it suddenly puts it into a top of the list priority more than just.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And and I think probably pastors have a big responsibility, because hopefully their congregation trusts their word. They may not trust somebody who writes out of an independent ministry in Arkansas or Louisiana or Washington or someplace like that, but the local pastor, I hope, has the confidence of the people that he can explain to them which way is up.
And in our area, there's quite a big movement of young people promoting this at the moment, which is why it's a bit relevant to this.
Yes, yeah.
And I think you also asked me, why am I conflating compliance document with last generation theology? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm only saying that once you have a compliance document and a committee that decides what's on the document, what if down the track last generation theology becomes something on the compliance document? So I'm just answering the person there.
That's not the way it's going to be.
No, I don't think so either.
What could happen would be a unit of the church someplace, under strong influence from some leaders, would introduce last generation theology in their unit in outer Mongolia or someplace. Then I think the General Conference may say, well, that's not Adventism, and you are out of compliance with our teaching. And that could happen. And they would send people over there to try to, I mean, this happened. We've had 2 churches in some countries in Europe until they got them reconciled. And one was the official and one was under the ground Adventist church. So it happens.
Yeah.
And it should be addressed for this last generation. That's a dangerous thing.
Yeah. And to Andrew, I think, just in answer to your question, I think I misspoke. I didn't really mean to tie the two together there. Look, we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately. I've got to say, Niels-Erik, you're the kind of person I would love to hang out with. I've really enjoyed shooting the breeze with you, and I apologise for some of the rapid fire questions and digging a bit deep in some areas, but my intentions are good. I hope to help bring some reflection and healing into the church by doing these interviews. So I just really appreciate you spending the time with me today. Thank you.
And I should make a disclaimer. This is unprepared, off the cuff.
For both of us.
And I try to answer carefully, but in the midst of conversation, I may have said something that doesn't sound quite right. And that happens to me too. And if I'm quoted, I'll probably say, maybe I said it, but I didn't mean it that way.
Exactly. And I think one of the things when I ponder people's viewing Ellen White, I think, boy, imagine if someone looked at my life and found a letter I wrote 30 years ago and said, well, this is what he believed. I'd go, whoa, hang on, I might believe something different next week, let alone 30 years ago. So I totally highlight what you've just said there, that this is an interview, a conversation. We've just been reflecting on things. No one's going to hold you to these specific things that you and I have talked about. So one last thing in parting, and you're welcome to join the Facebook group. A beautiful thing about the social media is that people can ask questions. They can continue with the debate if you want to. No pressure. But one last thing that you might want to just a quick summary. Graham has asked, what summary would you give for what the Adventist Church could learn from the Glacier View times and experience?
What do they say? Hindsight is always 20/20, something like that. Yeah. Well, I think in this particular case, some responsibility probably falls all around. I think management, here and there, everywhere, probably didn't pay attention and didn't get close to the educators, that was a church management, to really figure out what they were driving at. It seems to me that there was some lack there of getting onto that and taking an interest in that. I was at Avondale before it happened, in the mid-70s, and there was some tension, but as an outsider, well, I had a responsibility. I was a liaison officer of something, so I met with management every week there. So there was, I think, a lot of a good platform from which to talk about some issues that I just learned about when I got there. But the local people must have been thinking about them for a long time. What did they say? When did they sit down across the table and break bread and say, hey, we need to work that out somehow? So I think catching something early on, having conversations, especially breaking bread together and making it that kind of conversation before you have trials of public things. I think would be good. Secondly, I sometimes felt when I was there and elsewhere where I had been, say Andrews, when you're an administrator like a president, it's your job to explain the wishes of the board to the faculty and to express the concerns and issues of the faculty to the board and the users of the school. So you're a kind of translator, right? And I felt sometimes in my administration here that some of that was missing. The education people who are close to death, I think maybe they didn't always really keep their finger on the pulse where administrators were. Did they really know what went on in president's councils whenever they talked about stuff from the field, as we call it? Did the campus sort of appreciate what they were dealing with? And does the campus, the academic people, and I am one of them, sometimes understand how strong our opinions are and how fragile our church is? Mm. We have taken the position that the church is like a tower of strength. Well, that's what Martin Luther said. But it was a church that didn't exist in his days. It was a spiritual church. But I think the church is actually quite vulnerable. We have 2,000 years of history to see the foibles of the Christian church, and it has blundered so many times. Mm. And now we have a church with 25 million members, and we think it's ready for the kingdom. But it is fragile, and it doesn't take a lot of ill will on the part of its members to explore that fragility and hurt it. Also, in my own work here, I have found too often that we academic people who teach whatever we want to teach because we have academic freedom, we often talk about the church. The church does this and the church does that and the church does the other. And I've taught people at Andrews and Walla Walla and wherever I've been, listen, we are the church. It's not those guys in black suits in Washington. We are the church. So it's the church in first person, we. And when we say it should do this and should do that, then, well, we should do it. We should be part of doing that. That posture makes it a little easier to solve these issues before they blow up. And then we back into our corners, and the more we back in, the further we are from each other, and then we don't talk anymore. So these two things, administration trying to reach out and understand what makes academics tick, and administrators understanding how fragile the church really is. And we just can't pontificate and expect that it doesn't matter. It matters a lot how we do it. So that's what I would say, and that should have started 10 years before Glacier View, probably, when I first got to Avondale in the early 70s. And I was not aware of it.
Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen, boy, there's some gems of wisdom in the last few minutes there you've shared. I really appreciate that. And throughout this whole interview, there are going to be people saying, can we have a transcription of that? There's some really wonderful things that have come to light from this conversation. We really appreciate it, and I hope I can get you on the program again down the track We're not going to always be chatting about Glacier View down the track. There's all sorts of topics that we talk about. I'd love to have you back.
Please give our regards to our many friends at Avondale if you live around there.
I do. I see. In fact, coming up next is Lyndon Rogers. He'll be
yes.
on it in about 15 minutes. So there'll be a quick toilet break for everybody, and then we're back on with Dr. Lyndon Rogers at 2:00. So in 15 minutes.
Yeah. He was my host when I was there last.
Yeah, really. I'll say hello to him for you.
Special greetings to Jill if you connect with her.
She's been watching.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now I'm done for.
Not at all. She loves you.
Should have given a fair warning. I would have been much more polite.
No. I love authentic, honest, open conversations.
Okay.
Warts and all. We love each other.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Thank you so much. See you later. Wow, there we have it. And Gillian, you were watching back then and you were watching now. That was the interview with Dr. Niels-Erik Andreasen, part of season 2. So it was season 2, episode 22, and is a replay from 2020. And it felt like it was just live right now. I think some people may have even thought that was a live interview, but we are re-releasing season 2 onto YouTube. And as I said, we're up to number 22. We have our own channel just to host these incredible interviews. And I encourage people to go and check it out. I'm just going to quickly, and how are you going there, Gillian? Good to see you.
Hello.
Good to have you here. I'm just having a quick look where I put it. I just want to show people. Where is it? Oh, I can't find it. But anyway, if you look up season 2, Des Ford, Glacier View on YouTube, you'll find it. I'll try and put it in the link, a link in the description below as well. Interesting as he was closing there, Gillian. And
he was a bit worried about me being in the audience.
I thought that was hilarious. And here you were watching.
Now it's payback.
Payback time. Because last time you didn't get a chance to say anything back. So it's great that you've been watching today and that last minute you've said you'll come on the show. So it's a real treat, everybody watching. We've got Gillian Ford here with us. And interesting, right at the end there, he said, it's really we are the people of the church. It's we who get to decide, not the leaders up the top there. And he interestingly wrote the last chapter in this book. And we, the people, we can be the church. And when we speak up and share our views on Adventism, we get shut down. So I'd love to ask him what he thinks about that 5 years later. And when I read the final chapter, and he's still very positive and hopeful for the future, the big tent Adventist kind of future that he and Larry Geraghty would be sharing. And I think one that, in many ways you and Des shared as well. The big tent Adventism that utopia could happen. It could be. Anyway, welcome, Gillian. Good to have you here.
Hello to Angela. She just said hello to me.
Then we've got Fred.
So I wrote a few notes.
Salute, Gillian.
So I wrote a few notes, but
yeah.
Do you want to? I thought you did a very good job.
Why, thank you.
Yeah.
Every time
you
I
weren't
watch
quite
these,
as fired up back in those days.
No, I was more neutral. I'm glad I was, because I think that's what teased out the really good content.
Yeah.
Now I tend to polarize people.
You asked some very good questions, and when he said about Des lying on the floor and the issue of ethics, he talked about how to live all the time in class. I did most of his classes.
Yeah.
His biblical theology, I think.
Yeah, he definitely didn't keep that in his back pocket.
No. Anyway.
Yeah.
What do you want me to talk about?
Just share your thoughts, generally speaking. Go to your bullet points.
Well, I don't know whether you can see this, but
I'm just going
to. These are my notes.
I'm just going to reverse mirror that. There we go.
Okay. All right. Well, we were very good friends because we socialised when they were over at Avondale, and he was at PUC when we were first there. He left partway through, and because I distinctly remember us having meals there, and we used to socialise a lot with Greta Hartelius, and she was Danish, so often for Christmas or Thanksgiving, Niels-Erik and Demetra would come for that. So we had lots of opportunities to talk. Now, one thing I remember is that Niels-Erik is more liberal, and these issues don't concern liberal people as much because they see things completely different to somebody who's traditional. So I remember him saying to me, I think it was at PUC, he said 1844, and I think this is a good answer, but it wouldn't satisfy a lot of traditional people. He said 1844 was like the Red Sea for the Israelites. The Red Sea was the beginning of the new nation of Israel. For Adventism, it was the beginning of a new church. Now, isn't that a great answer? But
it confirms my theory.
That's the connection with 1844, but it's nothing to do with what's in great controversy.
No.
So there's a different way of looking at things.
I love that because it's like a divide. It's that divide, which I've often talked about. And I think why you see me getting passionate and frustrated is that the leaders behind the scenes, he believes that. But when you say it is two separate things, there is a divide. Oh, no, we're one big tent. That's what annoys me. That is duplicit.
Yes, but the real problem in the churches, to me, is the unethical behaviour of leadership.
I agree.
And it's going on. It's going on right now. And unfortunately, I find out about it and it makes me so angry. Yeah. You know, we accepted what happened to us back in Glacier View, and people will think that I'm still on about it. No. To get justice to Des. But, you know, I say to people, Des was justified at the cross. He doesn't need justification, but I do not like the way the church treats people.
Yeah.
And I could give you some current issues, fairly recent issues, and it's appalling.
What sort of things have you been thinking about? What sort of things are coming across your table?
Well, there's just a letter gone out about an individual in Kurrumbong to all the leaders of the church. Now, that's a big thing, just come out. And another thing is that the president in the North New Zealand conference was fired, and none of us know anything about it, in 2000, I think in 18 or 19. And it was terrible what was done, because, as I say, I find out about some of these things, but the rest of us know nothing about it. And a lot of it is the elite families who are pushing the tradition, and to me, they're the problem. That's why there's no advance.
Yeah, I agree.
And people, you know, who are pastors who love the gospel, if they speak up, they're done for.
Yep.
And what else are they trained for? And they would have to leave the flock, and they care about the people.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult thing, but to me, the first problem is far worse.
Yeah, you're right. Because that, you say, that's what holds up any kind of true progress, because the way they treat people, the way they, you know, have their power set up in a way that doesn't acknowledge anyone really, and so everyone's kind of pitted against each other.
Well, it's pretty sad. Anyway, let me go around my thing with a few comments. You mentioned Jan Paulsen. Now, the European scholars who grew up with Luther sort of take it for granted, so they can't see what Des would have anything to say about it. But the thing is that Adventism has taught a gospel of character development, hasn't taught the gospel by and large. Some people have taken it for granted. A lot of people have come in from other churches and have accepted it. But, one of the big problems, and I've talked about that before, I won't go into it today, is we've taught Wesleyan sanctification. Wesley and his family all read the Catholic scholars because Anglicans and Catholics are very close together, and he imbibed a view of sanctification that is more Catholic. And I've written about that and talked about it before, but that's a major problem, and it's one that's Milton Hook is, really concerned about. He's the one who's pushed it. But the Europeans, when it comes to issues like this, they sort of put their hands in the pocket. Now, John Rosier said with Jan Paulsen that he never taught, he taught against the investigative judgment in class at Newbold. But when his students were put out after Glacier View, he didn't do anything about it. Anyway, I've mentioned
Jan Paulsen. Is that who you meant to say? Jan Paulsen? Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Now, this thing about the omega of apostasy, this is what the leadership talked about, because when I spoke to Hamill on the Friday afternoon Glacier View and told him a lot of, this was after the meeting with Prexad, I said to him, a lot of people will leave if you fire Des. And he said, well, we don't want them. We've talked about this, and in the time of Kellogg, which was the omega of apostasy, we lost 10,000, and we anticipate that we'll lose 70,000, and we don't want them. I was horrified, but he didn't just say it to me. He said it to the Kime family, who started GNU. They talked to him on the phone. I also think I've published the first Evangelical newsletter, and Alan Crandall mentions this incident and says that a president of the college said it to him, used the same thing that I'm telling you. So I've published that as well. So that wasn't just some sort of right-wing thing. They were talking about this. They seriously talked about it. And shortly after that, the book, The Omega of Apostasy, came out, which was aimed at Des. Okay, what else?
Yeah.
Okay, that committee in 1983, Enoch Oliveira was the vice president. He was there. Duncan Eber, Bill Johnson. It would be Duncan Eber who would have spoken first. He was in charge of the meeting, and he probably made that statement about righteousness by faith. He was very much a righteousness by faith supporter, and he's the one who tried to get Des back in. That was why those meetings took place. Yes. Gerhard Hausel was there. He spoke about blood being taken into the sanctuary, and he'd used probably the same meeting at Glacier View. And our men, that was Smuts, Des, Calvin, Edwards, and Noel Mason, and I was there, didn't say very much. They shot him down. And of course, then Richard Lesher was there. Now, behind the scenes, back in 1982, and I've told this story in one of my volumes, probably 8 or 9. I get mixed up what's in where, is that those meetings in San Francisco at the Hilton in early 1983, or it could have been late 82, because we got the letters from Wilson, Parmenter, and Taylor, and I published those. And they were pretty careful, I think, publicly not to say that we were called apostate, but we were. Smuts as well, and Noel. And they went after our membership ever after that and took away the 3 men's ordination. Des wanted the men from GNU to go with him, and Neil Wilson didn't like it, but he allowed it. Anyway, what else was I going to say about that meeting? It's possible because these men were flying in. They're all very busy. Oh, Spangler was there as well. Bob Spangler. That one was important. But after that meeting of Gerhardt, which was their big play, he was the only one who made a public presentation that I recall. I might be wrong on that. When that failed, they sort of decided fairly fast that this wasn't going to work. Now, we went to, there were 3 meetings. Duncan Eva had come to our home in about October and talked to the GNU men, stayed with us. We were called, I went, Des went, and Calvin in November 1982. I remember Wilson's office with a carpet the colour of sunshine. I remember he was awful to Calvin Edwards.
Yeah.
And Des saying to them he didn't want to have these meetings if they would not address the doctrinal issues. And he promised that they would. When we actually got there to San Francisco, they wouldn't discuss them. They said, we're not discussing those here. So it was promised, but the original intent of the meeting started in early 82 when Parmenter went over to Spring Council and said, we've got to deal with Des because he's coming out to Australia and having these meetings. So I've got all the documents because Calvin kept them, because the church shared its documents with us. And I've published those, and you can follow them from spring 1982, July 82, and then in October, Duncan calls us up. And I said to him, what had happened a day or 2 before? I don't mean to go into this. They tell me if you don't want to hear it, but Eleanor Barrett had called me up, which was actually the only time she ever called me, and told me that Vern Parmenter had gone round to their house and said that his father had gone to full council and that he wanted to get Des's ordination taken away, call him apostate. If he hadn't said that, I would never have known, because it was never publicly announced. It was in the workers' manual, but they didn't want to cause an upset by saying publicly that Des was apostate. So it's very crafty, very craftily done. So this was in October, and he also said that they were going to take away our membership. So it's all right for people to say that we left. We actually left in 2001, not 2006.
Oh, okay.
Because Des was going to work for the Baptists. When they called Des apostate back in 1983, I sent in my membership, and Fred Beltman called me and said, Jill, please don't do this because we want to defend your membership. And PUC defended our membership for 17 years.
Wow.
So anyway, Des said we're going to hand in our membership, so we did then. But that's the background behind it.
Yeah.
They didn't want us, and they would have probably had a party to find out that we actually gave in our membership without causing any trouble. So that was all pre-planned. The front story. Oh, so when Duncan Eva called me, I said to him, I've heard about this. And I didn't tell him the source. I said, this is the front story that Neil Wilson wants to see if he can bring Des back into the church. I said, but the back story, and then I told him about what I'd heard from Australia, but I didn't say who had told me. Anyway, there's more to that story, but I won't go on about it. But that's the 1983 story. And when you hear what Niels-Erik said, he has no idea about the working of this. Just as he doesn't know about what happened at Glacier View with the 10-point statement,
right,
or what Hamill said to me about the Omega and the Alpha and the Omega of apostasy.
Right.
Anyway, And the other thing I've written down was Des never expressed to me that he thought of himself as Luther. This was said of him by people like Ken Samples and Christianity Today. Des would never say that.
No.
And remember, I've told you the story behind that. The main story is 1978, 2 years before Glacier View. Parmenter wrote to Des, told him he wouldn't be coming back to Avondale, and that if he did, he would go out into the field. And Des, he hadn't discussed it. He'd been in America at full council. And Des said to me, they'll send me out to the back of Burke and they'll fire me. So he knew that his number was up, that he wouldn't be in teaching. And so when Bob Brinsmead came out the next year, summer 1979, with 1844 re-examined, Des had been answering questions all around the field about this, because there are always a lot of Bob's followers around. So when he was asked, he didn't initiate it at all, to take the meeting for the forum the same month. He first of all, he said, I don't think I should do it. And then he said he would, because they said, you're speaking for Spectrum. Spectrum, people talk about all sorts of stuff. You'll be protected. But he wasn't. He was pulled out of the classroom and taken to Washington, D.C. And they broke his contract at PUC. And you don't get 6 months off and have your contract broken to have a job at the end.
Exactly. So
the other thing I wanted to say, because I'm sure you don't want to go on too long. Now, I've been doing volume 10.
Yes,
and
can't wait.
It's been a huge job, and I think it's probably the most important of them. And it happened, because when Harry Ballas was on, you remember I asked him if I could have that interview. It actually took me about 2 months to get it, because he went to Greece.
Yeah.
Then he went to New Zealand. He met with the minister who got put out. That's how I know about that.
Yeah.
And I also got given an article about a man called Wally Drain, who a lot of you wouldn't have heard of. He was German. He was put out of the church in New Zealand in 56, sorry. Was it 56? Yeah, April 56. Because of that, and because R.A. Grieve, who was another person who was put out, some of you will know about Grieve.
Yeah.
I went back all through that history. So I did a whole section. Actually, the book has got a number of people for different reasons who were put out of the church. One was for his liberal views. Wally Drain was one. Grieve. And the story is not what you've been told. It's quite fascinating. So I've written that history and been able to get hold of documents, and it's never been published before. So I'm pretty happy about that. But another thing that came up, and I'll stop with this, and then you can ask me questions if you want to. Now, this is page 449, because this book is a whopper. It's 580 pages. This is 3 pages. This is a letter that I wrote to Neil Wilson before February the 7th, 1980. And I've just arrived in Washington, and I know that Des has been in trouble because Richard Lesher, who was the Biblical Research Committee leader, had come over and he came to visit me. And he told me with great joy that Des was in trouble for leaking documents. And the story was that Dean Jennings, who was at PUC, was calling him, and I know who it was. Somebody in the stacks where he was in the Ellen White estate heard the call and misunderstood it. And Des said, I'm finding lots of stuff and very little else, but he ran to Neil Wilson. So Neil Wilson got into trouble. He got a very stiff letter. And of course, when I arrived in Washington, it's when that letter came out. Wow. So me being a very quiet, shy rose type, I wrote him a letter. And I said to him, look, I said, if you ask him not to tell people what's in what you're finding, he wouldn't do it. I said, he hasn't told me a thing. And I said, I've complained about it. Now, this is you won't be able to see it properly. I won't even be able to.
Oh, yeah, you can see it.
Yeah. Now, some of the writing is mine, and that was the fancy paper.
Oh, wow.
Now you see that writing up on this bit, right?
That's Jules' writing.
Now I published this letter before. Now it's a bit complicated, but bear with me because I get this stuff and then my mind goes, what I do is I'm the great organizer. I couldn't do what Gilbert Valentine does or Milton does, but I know where to find stuff, or I'll go looking for it, and I'm quite relentless.
Yeah.
So later I found I'd actually published this letter, but this time I looked at it and I looked at that lettering on the right. And when I actually read it, which most people wouldn't be able to do because it's summarized and it wouldn't make any sense to them, I knew who'd written it.
Oh.
It's got personal written in red. And then it's got, in black pen, Dad in Mitch, appreciate Des. It's very tiny, so I can't hardly read it. I can't read it all. But anyway, it was saying, can't be told anything. No poor judgment. It goes through Bob Brinsmead, relationship with Bob Brinsmead, speaking in Sligo. Des had spoken at the church and Neil Wilson didn't want him speaking. I can't remember. Anyway, over the page, I've written down the bottom. I've enlarged it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've typed out what it said. Because that's very important. And then on the third page, I put, sorry about this, these notes. And I've underlined them and I've gone 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Now, this is Neil Wilson, and the notes come from the Friday afternoon, which Kendra's Holoviak's dad was the head of archives. And he gave me those notes that Spangler wrote. They were to do the ministry. Because I wrote to him one day and I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if they'd recorded that meeting? And he said, oh, as a matter of fact, he said, they wrote notes and 4 different people did them. And I've typed these out and I published them in my books. But this is Spangler's handwriting. And this is Neil Wilson talking to Des, and he starts off saying his father was in Michigan. Okay, you get the first line, and how much they appreciated him at the University of Michigan. And they told his father, he said this in the Prexad meeting, he's sort of fluffing Des up before he jumps. And they said that Des had one of the brightest minds they'd ever met. Now, remember that a lot of people said that Des was not a good scholar, but that's not what his tutors thought there or at Manchester.
Yeah.
So it goes through the exact outline that he used in the Friday afternoon.
Oh, wow. And this is in volume 10.
I've got the points. This is volume 10.
By Friday afternoon, you're meaning Glacier View.
The reason this is important is because this is February. And Des hasn't written the Glacier View manuscript yet, has he?
Oh.
So Neil Wilson has
Not Glacier View.
written on my letter an outline of how he's going to deal with Des 7 months later.
Wow.
Do you like it?
That is that's the holy grail right there.
Oh, I couldn't believe it.
That confirms the theory you've had. That confirms the theory you've had all along, that they already knew what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah. And of course, the bad behavior of the leadership, and I've told you before that it starts with an eyewitness who was a nephew of George Burnside, that 3 weeks before Glacier View, Parmenter goes down and tells him Des is not going to survive Glacier View.
Yeah.
And then a relative and administrator who's written it down, it'll go in somewhere. I'm not saying where, it won't be in Australia. His father asked Athol Tolhurst before he left for Glacier View, have you read the manuscript? No, he says. And then he says, he's gone. And this administrator says, what do you mean? He said, Des won't survive Glacier View. See, they knew because, and I've got other things this is all documented from their stuff.
Mm.
I told you on the Thursday at Glacier View, and I didn't pick this up, but Cottrell did. It's in one of the articles I've got in volume 2, and when I read it, I nearly fell over. Parmenter said to the group that the Australasian Division Executive had given him a mandate to defrock Des whatever happened at Glacier View. Now, there was no meeting. This was probably in Parmenter's office with 2 other people who I could guess. We'll never know. They made this decision. So this is the problem. This is the way the leadership behaves, and this is why there's never any progress.
Yes.
And of course, people like Niels-Erik, well, he's had his own dealings. He's learned, but Des was interested in preaching the gospel, and the investigative judgment was anti-gospel, because the Old Testament, even in the Old Testament, it says that our sins are blotted out, they're thrown into the bottom of the sea, and we'll see them no more. And I could go on. The very simple arguments, and the idea that, Adventists have taught taking our sins into the sanctuary and defiling the sanctuary, but blood only cleanses. There's 1, 2, or 3 simple articles that just decimate the investigative judgment. That's why Des went to Glacier View, because Bob Brinsmead had come out on it, and he thought, now he's done this, it's got to be answered. And of course, he didn't plan to go to the forum. And he thought, the 2 men who asked him to go, Wayne and Adrian Zukoski, they both left the church. They were devastated that Des got put out.
Yeah, they had no idea what was about to unfold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most people who were there, another thing that I've got in this book, which I had sort of seen 2 little cut papers from the Criterion. All this stuff fits. That's the amazing thing. I get it from different sources. I find different stuff. I put it in order, and then I read it. Milton said to me, this book is highly organized, but I don't know how I'd do it. That's the funny thing. But anyway, Jonathan Butler wrote that article on Glacier View. And look, I looked him up. Jonathan Butler was not at Glacier View. So what this means is the scholars came back and told him what happened.
Yes.
And he's got it right.
Yes.
He's got it. He doesn't mention 2 things, the Tuesday afternoon and the letter read out by Pearson, which were huge dramatic moments that changed the tide against Des. He doesn't mention those, but everything else he's got right. About the 10-point statement, the consensus statement, everything. Good old John.
Yeah. Where is that
again? And
again?
I missed it. It's an article in the Criterion.
Right.
It's in volume 10.
In volume 10. Great.
Yeah. And of course, volume 9 was important. And I'll finish on this, unless I think of something else. There's a letter in there which Doug Hackelman gave me, because he's writing the biography of all the Cottrells.
Yes.
And he had a letter from Hamill to Ray Cottrell in 1984. And he's questioning what, because Ray very much supported Des. And in the spectrum, I don't know why it took him so long, he felt that Ray was not fair in saying there weren't any people qualified. There were very few people qualified to look at Des's manuscript. And he goes through a list of all the people who were PhDs. But of course, it doesn't mean it's their field. A lot of them have PhDs in communication and so on. So his arguments are not valid. But at the beginning of that letter, he basically says what Keith Parmenter told the leadership when he came over. And he told them that Des had caused division and controversy. And Hamill speaks about Des's evil acts. Now, that came from Parmenter. That's not published. We were told this.
Yeah.
That 1983 meeting, which you talked to Niels-Erik very well. Your content was very good.
Thank you.
And said that Duncan Eva and Spangler spoke to us and apologised for what happened at Glacier View and said Parmenter came over and said it has to be dealt with that week. So that's what I remember. There's no record of that. But Hamel's letter, it's a gift because it's a document that tells you. And not only that, I found another letter. Now, I keep thinking I've got no letters left. This is the miracle. There's a letter from Bob Parr. And until I read this, I thought, boy, this goes right along with the Neil Wilson letter. And it's a 4 or 5 page letter. I put the whole thing in. There's a number of letters, Cottrell letters, Bob Parr letters, and 2 or 3 from Neil Wilson. So that's the correspondence section in this book. It's full of so much other stuff. So I've told you, and I've gone through in detail about this 1987 letter, 1978 letter. I don't know what I said, but it's 1978. We got it. It was written on October 30. We got it November 2. So just briefly, Parmenter had been over to full council. He talked to Jack Castle. He asked him to keep Des. And then he went back to Australia and he announced to the workers, so somebody called us. It had to be called us because when they called us, it was the middle of October.
Right.
And they told us that he'd said that Castle asked to keep Des, opposite of what Parmenter said. No, hang on. Yeah, that's what Parmenter said to the workers, and that's what we were told. So the next day, having found out that Castle was coming back that day from full council and whatever he was doing, I went and sat in the office. Never done anything like that before. And I asked to talk to him. And I said to him, I hear we're staying. We've been told we're staying over here because we hadn't been told. He said, that's right. He said, Elder Parmenter talked to me and asked if we could keep Des to quieten things down in Australia. So he told a fib when he went back to Australia. He said that Castle wanted to keep Des because the students liked him. So that's when I told you, Des said to me, then we get the letter 2 weeks later. Now, and Parmenter starts off talking about the accusation. I've published that letter before. I might have put it in again this time. Sometimes I put them in twice because they're appropriate for both places.
Yeah.
And you can't possibly remember everything in the book. I mean, it's 5,000 pages. So
it's a good coffee table read.
Coffee table read. So what happened was, and I hadn't realised, was that Des wrote to Bob Parr and he sent the original. So Bob Parr writes to him, and he used to write these long chatty letters. And in the middle, he said, I'm going to send you this letter back because it's the original. And he mentioned, this is the 16th of November, so it's 2 weeks later. He said, I'm going to send it back to you because you might need it. And that's why I've got a copy.
Wow.
Because Bob Parr sent it back. And then he has a paragraph, and he says what Parmenter's been saying about Des causing controversy and stirring up trouble when he was in Australia. And of course, I've published before this letter from Jay Harris, who was an American youth leader, who wrote to Des. This was 2 or 3 months before we left to go to America. He said, this is the most peaceful campus I've ever been on. The kids complained about nothing. They were having prayer bands. They didn't complain about the food, the faculty, the classes, anything. So here's a peaceful campus, but Parmenter says Des is causing this trouble in the Hamill letter. And then I've got the Bob Parr letter. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, so good.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. And look, to make sure next week, it's funny, in the interview just then, I said in 15 minutes we will be interviewing Lyndon Rogers. And that is the next interview that I did do. Back then, I did season 2 was 4 to 6 interviews a week during lockdown. It was just bang. It was like 2 a day sometimes. And that's how we did the 86 in from between May and Christmas, I think. So we're only up to number 22 now. But next week I will play the Lyndon Rogers one, and I speak of that. I hope you get to watch it and maybe come on again at the end. But
that was one of the best. That's
one
very,
of the
very
best,
accurate.
and he it's very concise. It's a shorter one, and I'm pretty sure he refers to a letter from Pearson to Wilson, or the other way around, where they say something along the lines of, "We've got to draw a line in the sand here. Read Des Ford." My memory tells me that, so I can't wait to watch it again to see if that is said in there, and if so, what letter? Where is this letter? That kind of thing. So if you can join us next week.
Bert Haloviak gave me that. It would be in the books. It's in the collection that Kevin Ferris put together.
Okay, so it wasn't just in my imagination.
No, it's only a little comment.
Yes.
But I've also got Pearson's letter that was read out on the Thursday in this book. It's in another book as well. But then I've got John Rosier commenting on Pearson's letter.
You did. You also posted that on your Facebook sometime back on your wall, and that was astounding. I want to do a show just on that letter when the dust settles a bit.
Yeah.
Well, look, we might wrap it up. Yeah, I'm hoping to get John on in the next week or two, actually. Now, just a quick, before we say goodbye, I've worked out, I think, how to share just quickly those who want to go and see all of the season 2 interviews. That's the YouTube channel I've set up just for that. And you
just wait a minute, I'll get a book.
I'll keep talking while you're doing that. So everybody, I'd love you to look on YouTube now and subscribe. The season 2 unedited and complete. So this is where I am posting all of season 2. Yes, we go live here and share that information here, but this is in one place. So go and check that out. Also, while I'm screen sharing, hang on a second, Gillian. I'll just
that
this is the number 10 line. Oh, this is it, number 10.
Yeah.
As soon as it hits the shelves officially, let me know, and we will do an interview with you. And we'll chat about.
Well, I've told you about the good bits.
Yeah, well, that's all right.
There was something else I was going to say to you. Oh, you keep going.
So while you're just checking that, I just need to remind everybody that tomorrow Frank Marandino is our gospel presenter, and we only go live now into our YouTube channel, Good News Fellowship, finding Jesus at the heart of the gospel. That's what it looks like. And if you go at Gospel Good News Fellowship, you can find us there. So we no longer go live for our Good News Fellowship every week into the SDAQ&A land. We go over there into Good News Fellowship land. So go and look us up there. And one last quick plug for channels and things. I've started, for those of you who have a slightly shorter attention span, it's called SDAQ&A Highlights. Again, it's on YouTube, and I'm trying to upload every week if I can, interviews that I've done, but just the highlights of them. So 20 minutes here and there. I don't think any of them go longer than 20 minutes. They're all, there's 23 minutes, 22 minutes, 27 minutes, 21 minutes, 16 minutes. So if you've got the short attention span and you like to watch SDAQ&A, go and check out that channel as well. Okay, Gillian, did you remember what it was?
Yes, I remembered. I wanted to thank you because some of these books get written because of you.
Oh, wow.
Well, this was because of Harry Ballas, who mentioned this article.
That was such a good interview too, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And that interview is in there, and it's got stuff in it that's nowhere else.
Yeah.
This is what he did. I think it's 1988.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important interview.
Yeah. Thank you for that too. Darren Pratt writes, I'm having trouble keeping up with all the channels, but enjoy checking in here when I'm able. Darren, don't worry. This is the one. Don't worry about all the others. This is the one. People who have short attention spans, they can go to the highlights. People who want the Good News Fellowship, just the gospel every week, just go to Good News Fellowship. And if you down the track want to access just season 2, there's a channel for that. But this is the home, SDAQ&A, where you are watching now. And Darren also mentions, and it's coming up very soon, my interview with Wilf Pascoe on sanctification. It's a beauty. And that's coming up at some point in the near future as well. So Lyndon Rogers next week, a whole bunch of other interesting ones, and then Wilf Pascoe down the track too. Well, thank you very much, Gillian, for coming on. So good to see you again. I feel like we haven't touched base for ages.
It's true.
It's so good to see you. And maybe now that
I've been a busy girl.
You have been. And now
there's 2 other things I've been doing. Have you got to go and pick something up?
No, tell us. I've got another 2 minutes.
Okay. When R.A. Grieve got put out in 1956, about a few months after Wally Drain, this is how I got onto it. I found an article. You're saying, I think Gillian misspoke. Kellogg was the Alpha. That's right. With the
there's been a bit of that. No. There's a bit of chat about that. Originally, Kellogg was seen as the Omega. That's what Ellen White was intending, but Des was considered the Omega in the modern times.
To the power of 10.
Yes, exactly. So the Adventists like to just bring out the word Omega. Who knows, Gillian, you and I might be the Omega now.
So as well as doing that, I found in the paper that Gilbert did last year a reference to R.A. Grieve's answer, because there were 6 people put out in New Zealand, not for the same thing, but within a year.
Wow. In the late 50s.
55 to 56. This is what I sort of found in all this investigation.
I'm fascinated about that. I'll look forward to reading that. Yeah.
So I got that from America. Because I found it. I thought Gilbert might have this in his footnotes, because he mentioned it in an article he wrote about Heppenstall in Spectrum last year. And I remember that. So I went looking into his footnotes. And then I was able to get a hold of that paper. So I decided I put that in the book, R.A. Grieve, because he was on the same things as Des. And of course, he got bad mouth just the same. And his arguments are very cogent. So for somebody who wants to read the argumentation from the Book of Hebrews, etc., they'd find that very helpful. And then the other thing, now how did this happen? I was talking to Mary Trim.
Oh, wow.
And she helped me with some of the people with Grieve. And then she mentioned, I shouldn't mention how she got onto this, but she mentioned somebody else who was a female that she knew. And I had a lot of trouble. I've done a huge lot of work finding it. And I found this person, and I found some biographical stuff. She was around in the 1920s and 30s. And she came from New Zealand, another New Zealander that got put out. Do you want to hear this story? Have you got time for it?
Yes, yeah.
I can tell you when I come on next time.
No.
But I'm doing that as a brochure. Now, that's about... All right. Do you want me to tell the story or do it next time?
No, do it.
Okay. So I found her, and then somebody had done the genealogy, not her family, but I found her husband's name. And then when I was looking for stuff on him, I found that what the husband wrote, and ultimately what she wrote, because she was the originator of she was very bright, was on Dale Ratzlaff's Truth and Fables, a place that I wouldn't look. So I downloaded that. I didn't want to put it in the book because it's a different type of thing that I'm dealing with. It's way, And anyway, the book was 580. It was a very big book. It's the biggest one. So I didn't want to put any more in. But I've done the brochure. It's being proofed at the moment, and so is Greaves. I've done them as separate files, which I will give to you, and anybody who wants it, can get it. So that is a fascinating story. Her husband, whose name was I get it mixed up, Vowless, and it's quite a rare name, was an independent missionary who came back to New Zealand, but he was a Sabbath keeper, an independent Sabbath keeper, not an Adventist. And the Adventist staff asked him to preach, so he started preaching. Then they asked him to become an Adventist, so he became an Adventist. Anyway, she was with her mother and sister. Her name was Monica Ching from New Zealand. They went to Australia. She was at college in 1925, maybe 24 and 25. Now I've done a map of all the stuff in this book because I've got Ron Numbers stuff, an interview that Rob Wolfgram did with Ron Numbers, which is fascinating. So it's a lot of different people being put out for different reasons.
Right, yeah.
But it's stuff that's never been published.
Yeah.
Now, so she goes to college. Now, why was I telling you that about Numbers?
Trim?
Oh, she's there when Prescott and Fletcher are there.
Oh.
And she overheard her mother in Sydney talking to somebody who left the church, telling all the problems about Ellen White and the problems with the doctrine. So she not only goes there, she ends up going to PUC Walla Walla, Loma Linda in the late 1929 and 30. Then she comes back, she teaches at Avondale for a year. Didn't really like it. But while she's in America, she goes and talks. She's at St. Helena because of PUC, that's close by, and Willie White's there. She also talks to Leroy Froome, and she gets evasive answers about Ellen White, and not just evasive answers, porkies.
Wow.
So she goes back to Australia and she finds the climate the same, and she's present. I found what biographical stuff I could, and in the brochure I've got it in the middle, marriages, births, and all this sort of stuff. And also stuff, she wrote a couple of articles for the Australasian Record, and she mentions people like W.G. Turner. So wherever she went, she's asking questions about all this stuff. Goes back to New Zealand, then she marries this Robert Thomas Vowless, who's the ex-ministry who's become an Adventist. So she asked him to go to the library. This is probably mid-1930. And he starts reading all the stuff about Ellen White. And they both wrote stuff, and it's on Truth or Fables.
On
the last
website.
Name is Vowless. It's M Vowless and R-T, or R Vowless.
Right.
And the fascinating thing about this, all the problems with Ellen White, the health, the possible epilepsy, the plagiarism, all that we know now, they knew then. Fascinating.
This is Grieve and those guys.
1930s.
Yes.
1930s.
Wow. What was it? How do you spell Vowless? I'm just typing that in.
VOWLESS.
And it's
I know you'll be excited about this, but
yes.
It's being proofed.
Wow.
I
so
should get
it's
it with a couple
M
of weeks.
Vowless, is it?
Yeah. But look for R Vowless on Truth and Fables. It will come up.
Oh, there it is.
I spent many hours.
The White Elephant of Adventism.
That's it.
I'll look forward to reading that.
Now, she's very bright.
Wow, look at it.
And she taught.
Who's very bright?
The wife. She's the one who's got him to do the work. So
Right.
I put her stuff first in this brochure. Then I put all the biographical stuff I could find, like articles and marriages, deaths, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I put his stuff. It's in 2 parts.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Thanks for that.
And I'll send it to you, and, you know,
Yeah.
feel free to offer it to anybody. But that's the key thing about it.
Yes.
What they knew in 1930.
Yes.
And see, this is my point.
Yes.
The problem,
the leadership.
the progressives can't say anything because they just lose their job.
Yeah.
And the leadership are guilty.
Yes.
Because they keep hiding this from people.
Yeah.
And if only they'd admit it.
Yeah.
You know, it would be fine. You could carry on.
Yeah. It's interesting, the approach of the Mormons, when we're a bit behind them as far as YouTube channels go. They're way ahead of us in their former Mormon, kind of like our former program we've got going here. And I remember watching and looking into their stuff about 20 years ago. They took that approach of being more open at a leadership level, and then and it didn't really impact people leaving the church anymore or not. I think people appreciated that they're just being open about it, openly admit a lot of the stuff that they were previously covering up. And I think the Adventist church needs to do that too.
And see, I'm not anti-Ellen White. I pretty much take that as viewpoint, but I came into the church with a post questions on doctrine minister, and he taught me the very light version of Ellen White. She was a good Christian and so on. And I had to find out all of what traditional Adventism taught after I got married.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for you, it would have seemed like they were making it up.
When I saw this, I thought, well, Peter's going to love this.
I can't wait. My ears, you probably saw them prigging up. I can't wait to look at that.
Right.
Well, I'm going to have to leave it there.
That's all right.
And BDC has just said, so true, Gillian, to what you just said there. So thank you for joining us. It's so good to see you again. And maybe next week, if you're around this time.
Okay, if I'm around, yeah.
Yeah, see how you go. I'll be doing Lyndon Rogers this time next week. Oh, one last quick thing, Gillian. Can you, and you already have, I'm just going to do it publicly so I remember, you reached out for me and got contact details of Warren Trenchard and Don McAdams to see if they could come on the show. And you have sent me. Can I just ask again, can you please resend me their emails? I want to try and get them on the show the week after next. I think you mentioned Don McAdams was away and...
all right, Don McAdams and
Warren Trenchard. I just like to do things live when I think about it, and it just makes me remember it better for some reason.
Right.
And I'll try and get them. I think you said they were amenable to being on the show, but just couldn't write at the moment. So I'd love them to come on. Well,
this idea of epilepsy that Malaius Couperus brought out in the 1970s when he was editor, they've got all that in their brochure.
Incredible, in the 30s. Oh boy, I've got to do a bit of driving in the next little bit. I'll open it up and put my reader app on it so I can listen to that article on the Truth Fables. Thank you, Gillian. It's good to see you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And don't forget, if you'd like to join us tomorrow for Frank Merendino Good News Fellowship, you'll need to go to the channel because we're no longer here. Thanks, Gillian. Till next time. See you later. Hold that book up. That's going to be on the show soon. All 9 volumes. I'll get them all together and hold them up. All 10 volumes. Yeah, I'll hold them on high for 45 minutes.
Now, I want to make clear that my big purpose in doing these books, as Bob Wolfgram, who has read over half of them, he's a patient man, they're redemptive. I'm hoping the church will change. It doesn't seem likely. And the big focus is, the church is supposed to take the gospel to the world. That's the last sign. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not
Yeah, it's not. You're
out
not
to break
trying to
anything down.
or attack. No. Oh well.
Okay then.
Till
Bye.
next time. See you, everybody. See you, Gillian.
Bye.